I've been looking for a good time. I've been looking every day. I've been waiting for the sunshine. It's been coming my way. And it's been coming my way. I've been dancing at a hold down. Loved to chew the fat with folk. I've been sipping on the moonshine. I've been telling dirty jokes. And it's been coming my way. And it's been coming my way.
Hey everybody, this is Richard Sachs, your host on Lost Arts Radio. This is our show broadcasting worldwide on the 15th of May, Sunday evening. And really glad that you're with us tonight. We've got one of our favorite guests, Dr. Gabriel Cousens, back with us. And I always remind people that Dr. Cousens is an example of how medical doctors can be incredibly brilliant, inspiring, and good examples of what they teach. Dr. Cousens is really well known worldwide for healing the officially incurable disease known as diabetes. And there's a great video that you can see of that actually happening, of him with a group of patients that came to his place at Tree of Life Center in Patagonia, Arizona, where they do healing through fasting and live food and other therapies that go with that, like yoga, exercise, and meditation and things like that. And they get incredibly good results, of course, because they're working with nature instead of trying to poison the disease away, which is all too common in allopathic medicine these days. And many of the doctors that go through allopathic training, which is standard medical school, succumb to just memorizing vast amounts of data that in many cases make no sense. I mean, they're really great as far as the details of anatomy and physiology and biology and all these things that allow them, when combined with technical training, to put people to get back together in trauma or accidents or a few instances of necessary surgery, like with congenital defects that people are born with. But with health and disease, it's completely backwards and completely crazy, and they're so overwhelmed with peer pressure and amounts of things to memorize that they really don't have time to question when the teachers come into the medical school and tell them that vaccines are safe and effective, that drugs are cutting-edge medicine, and don't worry, there's no bad effects, and statistically almost nobody suffers from, being killed by vaccines or things like that, when it's simply not true. And the medical drug dealers come across as very authoritarian and knowledgeable, and they in turn just memorize things that in most cases they don't even know, or in a few cases they may know are false, and they tell the doctors this stuff anyway. And there's a great book called Confessions of an RX Drug Dealer, I believe it's called that, and it's an ex-employee of the pharmaceutical industry selling drugs when she knew what they did and finally couldn't stand it anymore and had the effects show up on some of her own family members. Very interesting book, particularly since it relates directly to psychiatry. I think she did mostly psychotropic drugs prescribed to deal with certain psychological conditions, which, as Dr. Rima Lebo and also Dr. Cousens in our interview tonight and other times have been pointing out, that these psychiatric conditions are just arbitrarily defined by a meeting of psychiatrists once every few years, put in a manual called the DSM. Now I think they're working on DSM-5, which is the latest one out. And they just decide what a condition is going to be, and they define it. There's no test for it. They kind of describe it, and then if you as a doctor, kind of think the patient has it, then you say, well, you have such and such condition, oppositional defiance disorder, or, some kind of eating disorder or whatever, and therefore we're going to cure you, or not cure, I guess that's out of style. We're going to manage your condition with this drug, which shouldn't be any problem. You just take it your whole life, and it might have side effects like suicide or homicide or schizophrenia or psychosis or whatever, but it's going to be really good for you. And when you get the side effects, which are actually the main effects from this drug, then don't worry, because we'll give you other drugs that'll hide those. And then, we'll just keep doing that and make sure you come in frequently to see the latest thing that's wrong with you. And it's a completely calculated, insane system that most doctors don't totally realize there's anything wrong with, although some of them do. As Dr. Cousens has pointed out before, they do realize there are things wrong with them, but they're defined legally as the medical standard of care, which means if you don't do it and you're a medical doctor, or you do something else like some kind of natural cure thing instead, you can lose your license. Or in the case of a bunch of holistic doctors in recent years and even recent days, you can lose your life, because the medical establishment is dead serious about maintaining the whole drug paradigm of dealing with disease. And as drug sales go up, they have more vacations for the doctors as little perks for helping them promote the drugs. And certainly with vaccines, they get to go to the Caribbean or something and give a half-hour talk and have a 2-week paid vacation. There's some pretty major incentives for the system continuing, and that's the carrot. And the stick is that if you don't go along with it, we'll discredit you, let everybody know that you're a crazy person, and make you sign documents to that effect. Or if you don't go along with that, we'll just kill you and move on to the next doctor. So it's really not easy for doctors to say anything outside of what is defined as this standard of care. It's actually easier for people that don't have any medical license, because they can't use their license, and the industry's not as worried about what they say, because they figure that most of the population will check it out with a licensed medical doctor, find out that the natural person sharing that kind of information was just crazy or uneducated, and everybody really needs the drugs. So, as a society, as they said in Oh Brother, Where Art Thou, we're in a really tight spot. We've got, most of the dominant industries in the world, certainly including the medical industry, intending to kill us and keep us, disease, sick, and drug dependent on the way to that. And they're willing to do it to keep the system in power and to keep money flowing. But at the top levels, as we've said many times before, it's totally not about money at all. There are levels far above that where they already have all the money. They control all the money. They're in the process of making the money that you have and that we have in circulation worth nothing, at which point they'll have total control, because we'll need their assistance even to have any food to eat. So, we have a lot of people now on the radio and on different alternative media, not the regular radio, but the alternative holistic health, alternative news media, saying what's wrong, but the shortage is what to do about it. And I really, the power structure itself would like us to violently revolt against it so that we can all just be killed, and it'll be obvious that they had to remove us from the scene as potential terrorists and people that were too dangerous to have running around free. So they would like us to violently revolt. And the people who are giving out not very good information are saying, yeah, that would be great to do. There's a lot of Black Lives Matter people and supposedly Bernie Sanders supporters and others like that just advocating and carrying out violence in the streets as a way to make things great. But it's not a good idea. So what we really need is the creativity of the population, meaning us, to come up with actual solutions. It's not good enough to know that nuclear power could destroy the world, or that chemtrails are already destroying the world. It's not enough to know that GMOs are going to kill the people who eat them and make them unable to reproduce and give them cancer and all that. I mean, it's good to have that information, but it's totally inadequate, because what's needed is taking that information and figuring out how to completely stop the situation. And as I've talked about with Dr. Cousens in the past interviews, because we're doing a series with him, we have the potential to turn things around, but we really have to demonstrate and show people how to do that once we figure it out ourselves. So that's very pressing, and it's not commonly known to society what we're going to do with them about all these things. It's just spreading the word about bad things happening, but we need to take the next step, not waiting. We need to do it now, and it's going to need our best creativity and brilliance. And my point is always that, we have these qualities internally inside of us. We have the brilliance and the the faculties to come up with new solutions to these things, and we need to use them. And it's great that people are becoming more aware that things are really serious, and there's catastrophes approaching from all sides. But it's questionable whether it's even worth knowing about that if you're not going to come up with a solution and a way to improve it. So that's our next job. And with respect to the topics we're going to talk about in that tonight, there are two main ones that Dr. Cousens wanted to address. The first one is psychiatric drugs, psychotropic drugs, and the second one, on the positive side, is elements of longevity, things that help you to live longer and not just exist, but in a good state, feeling good, enjoying your time, with lots of physical energy, without degenerative disease. And Dr. Cousens is in a really good position to talk about that, because he works with it all the time. And the ways that he works with his patients, like the diabetic patients, is not by drugging them. He gradually, or right away, whatever is possible in a given situation, takes the drugs away and gives them lifestyle enhancements that do more good than the drugs could possibly do. So we're going to talk to him about his ideas after all that experience with that, about what does the average person or any of us need to do to not only increase the length of our life to its normal optimum length, but the quality of it, so that we're not wishing we didn't have so much long life. And nowadays, a lot of people in the later stages of their life are not so happy about having their life last as long as it is, because they're living in constant pain and distress. They're addicted to multiple medical drugs. They're making things worse instead of better. They're just kind of dulling their perception of pain. They're not getting rid of the cause of it. And there have to be better ways of actually enjoying longevity. So we're going to talk to him about that. And on the psychiatric drug side, as is explained in that book, Confessions of an RX Drug Dealer. I don't know if it was drug dealer or drug pusher, one or the other. It's a really good book. And, what the lady was pointing out who wrote that book, who used to be a drug representative, telling the doctors what drugs to use and what vacations they were going to get paid if they sold a certain amount of them. And I'm sure they do the same thing with vaccines. She was saying that, no, the psychiatric drugs never help anything. In fact, in her opinion, they cover up some of the symptoms for a little while, just enough to get the patients psychologically hooked on the drug. And then after that, they make it worse. So they need higher doses or more additional drugs, which also make it worse. And then, it just goes downhill from there until at the end, the patient's completely dependent on 24-hour-a-day care. And of course, lots of drugs that have to go with that. And it's a brilliant business model. It's just really bad for the people involved. And that means millions and millions more as time goes by. So we're going to bring that up with Dr. Cousens, see how he feels about it. And I know from some of our recent guests, Dr. Labo and others, we certainly have seen that to be true in the vaccine world. And the difference, of course, with vaccines is that the ones selling the vaccines are completely immune from liability. If their products kill you or kill your kids or kill your family, it's no problem. They don't have any liability at all for that. Normally, you could sue them and they'd be out of business. And certainly, if they were selling a vitamin pill and anybody in your family even got sick from it, you might be able to get them out of business just from that. But if they're selling deadly injectable drugs called vaccines, Congress has decided it's best for all of us if they have no liability whatsoever. And you're sent to a special fake court called the vaccine court instead, which is not a real court, and you have to prove that the vaccine caused the damage that you're claiming it does, and most people can't do that, and so most of them don't even report it or go through the long and difficult process through that court. But tonight, we're going to be focusing instead on the psychiatric drugs that are getting prescribed to little kids and to people in elementary school. And when I said little kids, I mean babies, but also elementary school kids, high school kids, adults. And I guess the business goal is to get everybody addicted to as many of them as possible and tell the doctors that it's really good for everybody. It's the cutting edge standard of care, and hope that they go along with it. Make sure that they get highly rewarded for going along with it and punished for doing anything to the contrary. So we're going to get into that, and I have to apologize for, I've gotten some comments on previous lesson installments with Dr. Cousens because my most frequent comment seems to be wow, a single word, because Dr. Cousens, I don't know if he will this time or not, but in the past he's brought up statistics from his familiarity with what's in the medical literature and reports, and just the status of things that are happening in the world, and especially in the medical world, and people taking different kinds of drugs, and it's just amazing the kind of stuff he brings up. And so I frequently am just saying wow, not to be dramatic. I know it's probably a really boring comment for you guys to hear, but it's spontaneous, and I'm just amazed with what he brings up in his depth of knowledge of what's actually going on in the world of health and medicine. So it's probably going to happen tonight too. There's probably a drug to get me to stop it or a vaccine, but I haven't had either of those yet. So I'm going to keep having that response, and hopefully you'll be patient. So no pun intended, but just kind of look at it with me. I think you'll really be amazed, as I probably will, of the things that he brings up, and just to be careful about medical recommendations for drugging of your kids. Be very careful, or of yourself. Look and see if there are better alternatives, because there might be. And according to Rima Labo, who's practiced psychiatry for 40 years with no drug prescriptions given to her patients at all, there are always alternatives. And according to her, and we'll see if Dr. Cousens agrees with this, that if you did nothing whatsoever, you would cure a lot more patients than if you gave them the standard of care psychiatric drugs. And rather than do nothing, like Dr. Cousens, she has natural protocols that she follows in helping them, and has just been a massive assistance to her patients up to now over her 40 years of practice. And Dr. Cousens is similarly veteran in these things, and we want him to tell us about how he got to the place he is now, how his knowledge actually developed, what it went through in different stages, and maybe what his experiences were, with some of his mentors during medical school and internships and time after that, whether he actually got to experiment with taking people off of the psychiatric drugs, which would be fascinating to hear about, and if so, whether this was picked up on by the people who actually ran the facilities and whether it changed what they called standard of care or not. Kind of anxious to hear what he would say about that. And then when we get into the longevity part, see how the elements of longevity that he brings up coincide with what other people, Marcus Rothkranz, Matt Monarch, other really great natural health people would have to say about it that have been guests on our show before, and whether it goes together with the experience that I've personally had with all these things as well. So anyway, sorry for the long introduction. I just wanted you to have kind of all those things in mind when we talk to Dr. Cousens. Think about your own experiences with doctors that are recommending drugs for you or for your kids, or what's going on in school with your kids if you have children in elementary or high school or daycare centers. How is this impacting them? Are the psychiatric drugs actually already making inroads in your kids' schools? And how you could maybe be more aware of this and make sure your kid does not become a victim to these things, or that you don't. If you're feeling down, 1 week because it's been a really hard week and events in the world are making you feel a little bit discouraged, maybe this will make you more on guard, more cautious, more aware when the doctor says, no problem, just try some of this Prozac and let's see if you feel better. I mean, you need to really look at these things much, much more carefully, and it's better to do that before the drug gets in your mouth. So let's go talk to Dr. Cousens and see what he's got to share with us this time, and then we'll get together afterwards and go over some of it that I think will be really interesting. So have a good time, and we'll see you after this little interview. Thanks. Welcome, everybody. This is Richard Sachs, your host on Lost Arts Radio. We're broadcasting worldwide, and we're here for our next installment with our guest, Dr. Gabriel Cousens, friend and brilliant MD, in my opinion, who's really still in touch with how to take the knowledge that's taught in medical school and turn it to something natural and good in understanding how the body works and how to work with nature so that we're not dependent on synthetic and drug means. And speaking of drugs, we spent our last session with Dr. Cousens talking about the drugging of America, which is an incredible situation that we spent a while describing last time, but there's much more to it. This is a subject that could fill many books, and actually has filled many books. And so what we're doing is essentially distilling it down to the essentials compared to what there is to really look at. And we're going to continue, and Dr. Cousens is going to explain how this session will fit into what we went over last time and where we're going with this particular chapter. So welcome, Dr. Cousens. Thank you for being here, and I'm kind of excited to see where we're going to go this time.
Okay, well, it's nice to be here with you, Richard, and where we're going to start is that I made it clear in general that the drugging of America is actually a really big deal, and it's really now getting to a place where they're starting giving antipsychotic and antidepressant drugs to kids 2 years and younger.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
There's a few blatant problems with that. There's never been any research done on it.
2-year-olds, so their brains aren't even developed, really, is what you're saying.
That's the point. You see, I'm trying to think what people are thinking. So if anybody kind of knows basic human physiology, the kids' brains are really developing, a lot, 90% from 0 to 2, and then from 2 to 8, another level of development, and then actually into teenage years as well.
Okay.
So what we're looking at is when you talk to these doctors, well, we can't really do research because it's too dangerous. Okay.
Okay.
So we're just
except that's exactly what they're doing, right?
Exactly. But what they're doing is actually treating kids without any evidence whatsoever that these work, or any study about how detrimental it is. But you don't have to be a genius to know in the developing brain, using antidepressants and psychotics you're clearly disturbing the brain's function and actually changing its shape. So the fact is, they're doing this. It's at one point, where do we call it? It's not malpractice because it's within the limits of the system, but
it's kind of the standard of care, in fact, right?
That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it was standard of care for the Nazis to do experiments of people in the concentration camps. You are deliberately disrupting a kid's mental function and brain development. That's for sure. For what basis? Well, you make up diagnoses, as I explained. In the field of psychiatry, there is no concrete, real diagnosis based on, physical evidence. So you can create diagnosis, and as I said, 45% of the public is diagnosable.
Okay, right.
So you can make diagnosis for anything. Well, the kid's being resistant. Okay, fine. So what they're doing is taking kind of human development issues, which vary according to a child, and just kind of, in essence, making up their own criteria about, that's not quite normal, so we're going to treat it with a drug. So this is pretty serious. There's over about 8.6 million kids now on these antipsychotics and antidepressants without being psychotic or depressed.
Wow. So the diagnosis becomes it's an educated opinion is the diagnosis in these cases, right?
Well, it's an opinion. I don't think we can use the word educated here.
Okay, sorry. I meant in a standard sort of way.
Who can exactly describe normal? What culture has a copyright on what normal is?
Yeah. Okay.
So what we're doing is we're creating an outlet for the pharmaceuticals. That's actually what's happening, because that's an untapped market.
Right.
So, from obviously a holistic and humanistic point of view, this is really unethical. Within the confines of standard medical practice, it's considered fine. So that's what we're talking about. It's like when you look at, I'm going to digress or say, the fact that they've made these real efforts to kill the holistic doctors and, make it very difficult for anyone to come up with cancer cures that are all out there, somewhere along the line, these people, these organizations, there'll be some kind of Nuremberg trials. Something is going to happen because it's getting very much out of hand.
Except, actually, if you compare it to the Nuremberg situation, this is actually much bigger, right?
Well, yeah, you're dealing with millions of people, but whether it's bigger or smaller, the fact is these are against humanity. These are crimes against humanity.
Okay, right.
Whether you do 20 crimes or 200 crimes, they're crimes against humanity. And anyone with any common sense can see that. So these are, very, very serious problems. So, and then we kind of look at 10-15% of kids, whether it's 10 or 20, their estimates are on medications. Maybe 20% of high school kids are on some kind of psychotropics. Most, when they average high school kids psychotropics, you do an average across the board of every high school kid is on 1.2 psychotropics. Now, but only 20% are getting the psychotropics. But we have a major problem, but it's a major long-range problem. Because these, as Dr. Stephen Hyman in 1996 said, they cause brain perturbations. We don't know how they work. We know they don't work. There's no evidence that they work. People still are using them, but they do disorganize the physical structure and the neurochemical structures in the brain.
Okay, yeah, I was wondering if the definition of perturbation, it sounds like they're basically saying it makes the brain upset, but there must be a more specific definition.
Well, that's the term he used, so that's why I use it. It's an interesting term. some level of disorganization in the brain.
Okay.
Both physically and neurochemically.
Right.
Oh, so I kind of created this overview because we're disabling our children as well as our adults, because I think 1 out of 4 women and 1 out of 5 men are on the medications. There's over 70 million people who are on some kind of psychotropic. So it's pretty significant. So that's kind of the background.
You're fading out just a little bit there on the last part.
Okay, how's that? Is that better?
Yeah.
The microphone. So that's the background. And a man named Robert Whitaker in the Journal of Ethical, basically wrote a book on the anatomy of an epidemic, psychiatric drugs, and the astonishing rise of mental illness in America. So, as I mentioned in our last session, 1850, okay, the rate of mental illness is 0.2 per 1,000. And
0.2, okay.
So now what's really happening...
That means, is that the same, like 2 people out of 10,000, something like that? 1 person out of 5,000?
No, but the biggest thing to understand in simple terms is it's 100 times higher today.
Okay.
It's per 100,000 population. So that's what it is. So today, compared to 1850, there's 100 times more people who are considered mentally disabled.
Right.
Now, more recently, with the introduction of Thorazine, which is the first major antipsychotic, in 1955, there was a 5-fold increase. Okay.
So when they started giving the medicine for it, it made it 5 times as bad, is what you're saying, right?
They have 5 times more people becoming mentally disabled.
Okay. Somebody should have noticed something wrong with that whole picture, right?
Right. And then in 1987, when they added Prozac, SSRI, 1987, it's doubled. So we have the 5-fold, and then we double that 5-fold.
Okay.
And so now we're up to 20 times more people who are mentally disabled. So, as
compared to the 1950s.
Right. Is this some kind of epidemic? Is it a virus people are catching? Is it, the environmental pollution? What's going on? And it comes back to the question, is our drug-based paradigm of, quote, care fueling this modern-day plague? And as I pointed out, yes, it is. But today I'm going to give you a little bit more kind of a detail. Last time was an overview, and it was a lot of material for people, right?
Yeah.
So, but at least we have this background that we have an epidemic. There's 100 times more people mentally disabled, which means they can't take care of themselves.
Okay, right.
And now we're going to look at it a little bit more in detail. Okay, as we've added, the Risperidol and Zyprexa, and it goes on lots. Now, along with the increase in mentally disabled, there was a 40-fold increase in the amount of money that was being made. So in 1986, pharmaceuticals making about $500 million from antidepressants and antipsychotics, and now in 2004, last data, it was $20 billion. So it's a 40-fold increase.
Wow. And is that figure just on the cost of the drug, or is that the time of the doctor's
selling antipsychotics and antidepressants?
Okay.
That's their retail profit.
Right. Okay.
Okay. So, again, I'm going to say, there we are. That's what we're looking at. And the rate in 1850 is at 0.2. It was per 100,000, just not 100.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah.
Well, it was
right.
per thousand. So 0.2 people per thousand.
Okay.
50,
Okay.
And 20 people per thousand in 2000.
Wow. Okay. 40 times higher.
Well, it's 100 times higher because the math works out in a different way. Okay. Now, what we're looking at is, how did this happen? Okay, so we had this idea in the 60s that the Thorazine and the standard, what we call neuroleptics or antipsychotics, were shown to block dopamine activity in the brain. Meaning, dopamine is a key feel-well neurotransmitter, particularly for men, that when men do certain activities, I'm talking about sex, but I'm talking about doing good job, doing positive things, getting every kind of a positive reward. It will increase their dopamine. That would increase then their endorphins. Okay, so dopamine is the kind of the main feel good for men. It also, if you take sugar, it will stimulate dopamine, and again, endorphins will go up. So it's a reward center. Okay. So
careful not to get away from your mic there.
Okay. Am I away again, or?
Yeah, you're good now.
Okay. So basically, that was the theory, that by blocking the dopamine, they would normalize the dopamine system. The only trouble is, there was no evidence ever to show this was true. Okay, that's the problem. They use the word evidence-based medicine as if it's a religion, but they don't go by it. There is.
Are you saying that was there ever any correlation shown between blocking dopamine and doing anything good?
No, that's my point.
Okay.
All we know is it tended to block dopamine, but it wasn't related to schizophrenia. Okay.
So we don't know how they came up with that drug, basically, is what I'm asking, right?
Well, I'm not sure how they did that. That we don't know.
Okay. All right.
It affected people's states. But basically, all we know is that the researchers did not find that people with schizophrenia had an overactive dopamine system prior to being medicated. That they did finally discover. Or the same thing, people are depressed or lower serotonin. There's no evidence about that.
Okay. Right.
So, as far back, in 1999, this Surgeon General David Satcher said the causes of mental disorders remain unknown. That's the point. Causes remain unknown. So all these biochemical things, you got a biochemical, it's all a mythological statement. No evidence whatsoever.
That's amazing. Okay.
That's the key. No evidence whatsoever. I just want to make the point. Okay? And so then you have 1996, the head of the National Institute of Health, I mentioned Stephen Hyman. He basically said, antipsychotics, antidepressants, anti-anxieties create perturbations, that's the word, that helps you not forget it, in neurotransmitter function. In other words, it disorganizes the brain biochemistry.
Okay.
So, that's the point. Well, we know that happens, but it doesn't really work, okay? So, basically we know that Prozac and other SSRIs block the reuptake of serotonin. Okay, we know that, but it doesn't really change. The theory was, that will increase serotonin. But actually what it does is it disrupts the brain, and the brain actually downgrades its ability to respond. So the neurons start releasing less serotonin, and postsynaptic neurons, which is, at the other end of it, it decreases the number of serotonin receptors. So the density of serotonin receptors in the brain may decrease as much as 50%. Now you've really caused a problem.
Wow.
Okay. You've actually put a stress on the brain, and the brain responds by secreting less serotonin and decreasing the receptors. So, yes, they increase serotonin. The brain's readjusting to this stress by using less serotonin.
Okay.
And then also there are changes in the intracellular signaling and gene expression. So basically the brain qualitatively and quantitatively is different from the normal brain as a result of the medications. Now it's not just me saying that, but what we're seeing is, for example, the Princeton neuroscientist Barry Jacobs said, psychiatric drugs induce pathology. I just want to say that again, because that's what we got to understand. Psychiatric drugs induce pathology, and I'm going to say in the brain neurochemistry.
Okay.
So once you understand that, you don't have to be a genius to understand why they would precipitate an epidemic of mental illness. Right?
Yeah, well, yeah, because they're giving it to a lot of people.
And they're altering the normal neuro pathways and the neurochemistry.
Right.
So
a normal person would ask, well, why would they be doing this at all if it's just making everything worse?
So the thing that you have to understand, because it's a good question, and it's a little naive.
Yeah, I know, but just a natural question.
Why is it they do so many things? Why do they give vaccines when we know that they cause autism? Why is it they're doing only radiation and chemotherapy when we know that there are really better ways to go, and the general percentage of cancer cures hasn't increased with all their different things?
Right.
Why is it that they're giving these psychopharmacologicals when they don't work? Well, you go from $500 million to $20 billion.
Yeah.
You have a certain, we call it a monetary motivation.
Right.
So you get blind. So the people writing opinion papers, these are only opinion. There's no research, that shows they work. They're all opinions. They're being, they're influenced by the money that's flowing. So people go blind. The doctors at the bottom, well, you're not seeing all that's going on. You kind of think you're helping, because most doctors don't read the literature.
Right. Yeah.
So they think they're helping, but are they really helping? And they're not. They're actually causing harm. So now I want to turn, and actually, not that I was involved in the research, but where I was studying in my residency, some of the key researchers were. So I knew some of these guys, They're really good people.
Yeah.
Most of them are alive anymore, because this is in the 70s. So let's, now the National Institute of Mental Health gets involved, They say, well, I think we should study it. This is a totally correct response.
They think we should what? I didn't quite hear that.
Study it.
Oh, okay.
See what they work. People
think that good idea.
Study it. We can't just go on our belief systems and our mythologies. Let's study it. That's reasonable.
That makes sense.
That's the right thing to do.
Right.
So in the early 60s, there was a 9-hospital trial, about 344 patients. With the antipsychotics. Now here's where people get lost. So at the end of 6 weeks, 75% of the drug-treated patients were improved, or much improved, compared to 23% placebo. So at 6 weeks, actually the drugs are looking pretty good.
Okay.
Now, You got to look at the big picture, though, right? That was a study done in 1964. However, and here's the key, and this is the really key. 3 years later, when the report came out on the 1-year outcomes, not the 6-week outcomes, they were surprised to find that patients who received placebo treatment were less likely to be rehospitalized than those who received any of these 3 active phenothiazines. Did you follow what I just said?
Yeah, but it'd be good to repeat it in different words, I think.
So, these are some of my mentors. Dr. Cole was the head of the hospital and previous head of the National Institute of Mental Health. This guy Booth and Dr. Goldberg, who was actually my immediate supervisor. So these are personal friends, okay?
Mm-hmm. Okay.
What they did is they said, let's see how these people are a year later. Now, they look good at 6 weeks, but 6 weeks is a pretty short time out of a person's life.
Mm-hmm. Right.
What they found is that people who did not receive treatment, okay, after a year, they were less likely to have been rehospitalized than any of those.
For hospitalized for any causes, basically.
For psychosis.
Oh, okay.
Than those who were on the antipsychotics. That was in 1967.
All right.
So this is important because these guys, as I say, these are personal friends. I don't think any of them are alive now, but they were friends of mine in the early 70s. They were my actual teachers, okay?
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So I have a certain awareness about this, okay? So
yeah.
So, but what does that do? There's a red flag there saying, wow, while the drugs may be effective over the short term, maybe they made people more biologically vulnerable to psychosis over the long term.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
As evidenced by the higher rates of rehospitalizations.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, total sense. It's basically
short term looked good.
The people that are they take the drugs, they seem to correct the symptoms for a while in more of the people, and then in the longer terms it turns out that they do the opposite, if I'm understanding you.
That they're creating damage to the brain.
Right.
So here's how it goes, okay? And this is the reality, because as a psychiatrist, if somebody comes in, they're blatantly psychotic, they're suicidal, they're homicidal, like whatever's going on, okay? And you give them a medic oral, or you give a shot of Haldol, and you calm the situation down.
Right.
Now, if you just give them one shot and that's it, we're just coming, you haven't really done so much trouble. But if you put them on it chronically, that's where the problem really is. Does that make sense?
All right. So they're really paying for a temporary reduction of symptoms.
Yeah, where actually the proper way, and actually the truth is when I was doing these things, fine, you got your shot, one shot, that's it, just to calm things down, and that's it, you're off. There's no other drugs.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So one-time thing, let's get out of this crisis, okay, so you don't have to stay in the hospital. Okay, so what they found, because NIMH then began really studying this, okay, as they looked at medication withdrawal studies, okay, and what they found, and this makes sense, you'll understand, is that the relapse rates rose in direct correlation with the level of the neuroleptic dose, in other words, the level of dose of the antipsychotic. The more antipsychotic, the worse your withdrawal situation was.
Right. Okay.
So they did 2 trials. This is the National Institute of Mental Health. This isn't just podunk you here, okay? And only 7% of the people on the placebo relapsed.
Okay.
23% of the patients on less than 300 milligrams of the Thorazine relapsed. Okay, that's 23. Now let's go at 300 milligrams. But 54%, that's half of the people on 300 to 500 milligrams relapse. So the higher the dose. And 65% relapse if they were taking more than 500. So the more the medication, the more the drug, the higher the rate of relapse, because this is my theory, but it bears out, because you've got this perturbation of the brain chemistry. And you actually change the physical structure of the brain. That's the key to understand.
Okay.
So what we see is relapse was related to the dose of the medication.
Okay.
So the higher the dose, the higher the probability of relapse. So that's pretty significant because you see people get stuck on this for life. Now,
yeah, exactly.
Often I would start with people and take them off, okay? And half the people will relapse in 4 months, but the other half will be okay. I had a little rebellion in my hand as a psych resident, because I took one ward, I took everybody off medications. Everybody went, what do you do? But I had backup. I had my own supervisor, Dr. Goldberg, and Jonathan Gold, head of the hospital, and they let me do it, and I proved the point. 50% didn't relapse, and 50% did fine. Put them back on medication.
Okay.
50% go medication free. That's significant. My motivation was about tardive dyskinesia. What is that? One of the long-term, irreversible, I want to use the word irreversible, side effects of being on these antipsychotics is tardive dyskinesia, where you have, you've seen the picture of the pill rolling, they're kind of hunched over, look like they have Parkinson's disease. They have a lot of severe neurological quirks. It's very dysfunctional.
Okay.
And so people are long-term use of the antipsychotics actually can suffer this tardive dyskinesia, which is very debilitating.
Wow. So
big deal. I'll take them all off and let's see what happens.
Yeah.
I say 50% of the people from the permanent damage of tardive dyskinesia, I've done a good thing.
So did they, when you demonstrated that, did they change the policy in the hospital?
I would just like to say yes, but that's probably not what happened.
Okay.
But remember, the research, I was just proving the point of the research. I didn't do the original research.
Okay. Still seems like a really significant
thing. It's really hard, okay? People get really attached to these things.
Yeah.
Okay? But what I am saying is the longer people are on and the higher the dose, the more there's a biological vulnerability to recurrent psychosis. Okay, so wow, people got more concerned. And so they actually did more research. Gardos and Cole, again, these are guys I know, they reported in 76 that forget the withdrawal, there was a greater relapse during people who were on drugs. Was greater in severity, okay, than when people weren't taking drugs. Now that's a very powerful statement.
Yeah.
So, and then they looked at statistics, and this is really interesting because we got to look at statistics. I mean, we don't have to listen. We could keep our own mythologies going, but in this one state hospital, Boston State, in 1947. 45% of the people didn't relapse. Okay? 76% were successful after leaving the hospital. That's good. That's pretty reasonable.
Right.
But here's the contrast. When people were treated in 67, 20 years later, with neuroleptics, okay, antipsychotics, okay, instead of 45% being okay, after 5 years, we always look at a 5-year follow. Only 31% were okay.
Wow. So the new drug was not a very good advance, according to that.
Well, it was a retrogression. It was 14% more disability. Okay, and these people had more relapse, and they were a lot more socially dependent, a lot less functionable. They needed a lot more support as compared to people 47. So really, a very practical way, it's a lot better not to put people on medication.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Now we're going to go a step further because people are like, oh, okay. Now, so what I'm trying to say here is they actually did some research on this. They didn't let it be just people's, belief systems.
Yeah. Okay.
The NIMH got back in the study, story in the 70s, and what they found is that those who didn't have drugs did better in the 5-year follow-up than those who were treated with drugs. Okay? So, as I mentioned, and so one study, this guy Carpenter found that only 35% of the people that didn't get medication relapsed. Okay? Within a year, versus 45% who relapsed on on antipsychotics. So clearly, all along, we're having the same picture. If you do no medications, you're going to do better. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
And another research, in other words, there's more than one research going on, so that makes it more valid. 80 male schizophrenics, 27% who didn't receive, only 27% had a relapse in 3 years, as compared to 62% of people who are in antipsychotics.
Wow.
So he took 80 people, divides it in half, and only 27% who didn't receive it relapsed versus 62% after 3 years who received medication. Well, that's a terrible percent. That's like almost 3 to 1. Okay?
Right.
And then the head of schizophrenia research is Dr. Moshe, who's actually a big name, very well-known person. He found that people who were treated without neuroleptics, just in a group home, staffed by non-professionals, had a lower relapse rate over 2 years than a control group treated with drugs in hospital. So if you don't have any professionals involved, you don't do drugs, people are going to do better. They were better. Now that's quite a statement, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, I think most people wouldn't imagine why that wouldn't change the whole industry.
Yeah. If as we said before, if you're naive and don't understand that money is driving it.
No, most people think that they're just desperately trying to fix everybody and get the diseases gone.
Right. So this is the point. Okay. So more research is being done, and basically neuroleptics, antipsychotics, what they found blocks 70 to 90% of the dopamine receptors.
Okay.
So they're a pathological insult to the brain. So what happened?
Yeah.
We had talked about a few minutes ago about serotonin receptors. Now we're talking about dopamine. Okay, and so 70 to 9% of all the dopamine receptors are blocked. Now this is key. That's it, as they say, pathological insult. But the brain compensates. Remember, the brain's fluid, okay? And they found that it increased the postsynaptic dopaminergic cells, increased their density by 30%. So the brain's like, okay, you're going to cut it down, I'll increase the density. Now this is important because that's part of the problem. When people come off these, you get super sensitive to dopamine once you stop blocking it.
I see. Okay. Yeah, that would be a reason that you'd have to come off gradually, basically, right? Well,
that's the reason there's more relapse.
Okay.
It's consistently saying, if you're on a drug, there's going to be more relapse. Whether you're on the drug or you withdraw from the drug, it doesn't matter. You're going to have a higher rate of relapse and hospitalizations.
Because of the compensation that the brain's done.
Well, that's part of it. I don't want to go that far.
Okay.
So we have to stay at the clinical level as well. Guess what? This is what's going on. You're just going to have more relapse.
Okay.
Because the brain's now super sensitive to dopamine.
Right.
So it's like, this is, but again, the researchers are sorting it out. We actually have some answers, just what I'm just saying.
Mm-hmm.
And more research. Everybody gets slightly different data, but Bachoven did a retrospective. In other words, you just study the hospital records, and he found that if you had minimal or no exposure to antipsychotics, 40% who suffered a psychotic break and diagnosed with schizophrenia would not relapse after leaving out. So that's a nice percentage. And as many as 65% would function fairly well. Okay, that's important. So, but once you're treated on your first episode, it's a different fate, okay? That these drug-induced changes, which I mentioned, the brain's compensating, increases the biological vulnerability to psychosis. That's what I'm trying to say here. And creating a higher rate of chronically ill, mentally disabled people.
Okay.
So how do we look at that? So the World Health Organization, very thoughtfully, because they do some thoughtful things, compares schizophrenic outcomes in rich countries and poor countries. So where do we look at? We look at India, Nigeria, and Colombia. And in those countries, only 16% were given the antipsychotics.
Mm-hmm.
Okay?
Okay.
And of those groups, 2/3 did well, meaning, it was good, but 1/3 were chronically ill. So in this group of people with only 16% out of the total group getting the neuroleptics, what happened is 2/3 of the people did well and only 1/3 relapsed. But they looked at first world countries like the U.S., 61% were put on antipsychotics, and the ratios were just the opposite. Only 1/3 did well instead of 2/3, and the remaining 2/3 became chronically disabled. So if you get, what they found is that if you had just a small percentage got the antipsychotics, the results were really pretty good for long term. We have to look at long term. We have to look at people's lives. But if you got 2/3 or 61% were on antipsychotics, their ratio of outcome was just the opposite. Only 1/3 had a good outcome instead of 2/3.
Okay, so there's just totally no question that the psychiatric drugs are causing harm and rather than improvement.
That's exactly the correct conclusion, and and what they began seeing with MRI studies, magnetic resonance, that's in the 90s, is that drugs cause an atrophy of the cerebral cortex and enlarge the basal ganglion. The basal ganglion is kind of where some of the neurotransmitters like dopamine come from, okay? But they cause an atrophy of the cerebral cortex. So that's your brain function.
Right.
So we look at mentally disabled people, and they have excess of basal ganglion and a decrease of the cerebral cortex. And that the increase in the basal ganglion was definitely associated with greater severity of symptoms. Okay?
I wonder if it's increasing because it's trying to produce more of what's being blocked.
Right. Most likely that's what it is.
Okay.
But the overall point is what you actually said. The antipsychotics make your condition worse except in the very, very beginning. But long-term, 1-year studies, 5-year studies, you have considerably more disability with long-term use of antipsychotics.
Okay.
So that's significant, obviously, because if anybody reads all the studies, it's obvious the best way to work with people is don't give them antipsychotics.
Yeah.
And they have a much better chance of coming to some level of normality.
So you've already helped them by not doing anything.
Well, you take care of them and you manage them, and you keep them contained enough so that their psychosis will come down and becomes, they get out of the hospital.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
A good network, a good halfway house, good family support. I mean, you're helping them, but you're not giving them drugs.
Okay. All right.
You're not just letting them run around on the streets either. They have to be contained, and that will speed up the reintegration. People have to be protected in the time of reintegration, so that they'll reintegrate more healthily, safer, and more quickly.
Okay. Okay.
And that way, a person's chance as a psychotic break could really do quite well in the world. I'll just put it that way. They really can do well, and I'll just put it. That's probably the best way to understand it.
If they're not damaged by the drugs, they can end up doing well.
Correct. I'm talking about a no drug thing. Yes, that's what I'm saying.
Okay.
That's exactly what I'm saying.
All right.
So does that story stop with that? No, we got the same problem with antidepressants. So again, one of my cohorts, Dr. Cole, Dr. Jonathan Tesher from Harvard, found that people on antidepressants had 3 times higher rate of suicidality. They reported it to the FDA, and they got nowhere. They wouldn't even let them speak. And I'm talking, these are top people. They're not like, the usual researchers. They wouldn't hear them.
Okay, so they were trying to present what they found to the FDA, and the FDA didn't want to listen to that.
Correct.
Okay.
Couldn't get an adequate hearing.
Right.
That's pretty significant. As Jonathan Cole was the previous head of the NIMH.
I'm losing you a little bit on the fainter parts there.
Previous head of the National Institute of Mental Health. So it's like, well, hey, he's not a small character here.
Okay.
But if people don't want to hear it, and they're being, bought off, which is really what we're talking about, and there's ample evidence of that. That's not a random claim. They don't want to hear it.
Right.
And most people have heard pretty clearly the FDA is actually not there to represent the public, but they're there to represent the pharmaceuticals. In all the departments, whether you're talking about vaccines, whether you're talking about cancer, antipsychotics, it's all the same.
Yeah.
So here we go with antidepressants. And it's the same story. There's a short-term effect that looks better than the placebo. But again, as I said last time, when you add up the placebo in a variety of ways, and you have an active placebo, there's really no difference in the efficacy.
Okay, so in other words, the short-term benefit might not exist, actually.
That's exactly what I'm saying.
Yeah, that's a pretty major statement in itself.
Yeah, well, it's there, and it's in the research. So an active placebo, which gives you side effects, is just as effective as the medication.
Okay.
That's what I'm saying. And there's a lot of research to show that.
Yeah.
So, it's the same story. NIMH does their research, and they basically found that, when they compare cognitive behavior therapy and interpersonal therapy and antidepressant therapy and placebo, at the end of 16 weeks, there was no difference in any of the systems.
Okay. All right. So, if they want to have a short-term...
I will tell you, though, I don't agree with it totally, because I know when I'm working with people, I get results. With the orthomolecular and the kind of psychospiritual support. So
yeah, but not with drugs.
No, not with drugs.
Right. So what I'm thinking from what you've said is that if you really understand everything that you've just been going over, and you want a good short-term result, and you want to do it immediately without the drawbacks, then you would always use a placebo, basically, because it has no negative drawbacks.
Correct. But I don't really use placebos. I use, we do get results.
Yeah, there's better things than placebos, but I'm just saying, compared to the drug, you'd be doing better to go into the placebo business.
Exactly. So at 16 weeks, no difference. Now, that's worth considering, okay?
Mm-hmm.
But there's more to the story. And this is not the fun thing part of the story, but I'm going to just share, as recent evidence is coming up, this is not so great. So, what are some of the problems with the SSRIs? Well, they raise the estrogen levels, which makes women more susceptible to breast cancer and is feminizing to men. Okay? It increases the risk of stroke by 50%. That's not great.
Wow.
Pregnant mothers, and they shouldn't ever be giving this to pregnant mothers, okay, there was an increase in life-threatening birth defects. They did a research on 3,000 mothers, okay? They took the antidepressants from 1 to 3 months before to 3 months into their pregnancy, from 1 month before to 3 months into their pregnancy. Like, that's not so cool. It's like common sense. Do not give anything to pregnant mothers. Okay, that's pretty good. Don't give them vaccinations. Don't give them drugs.
Yeah.
Give the fetus a break. So, unfortunately, the only break the fetus is getting is in their DNA. Not what's to want. So they studied Celexa, Lexapro, Prozac, Paxil, Zoloft. These are all, the common drugs. Okay.
Okay.
So what they found, and the Paxil had the worst effect. Okay, is that made the developing babies 2 to 3.5 times more likely to have developmental problems. That means congenital defects, head, heart, intestinal congenital defects.
Okay.
That's serious.
And I mean, obviously, too, this is not a study where they give these women the drug for the study. This is going back and seeing what's already happened, and correlating the results that are already available, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly. And they just took 30,000 mothers.
Yeah, okay.
So, SSRIs are not exactly safe. Now, they also found on the mother, as we talked with John Nicole, there were more suicidal thoughts, more convulsions, more loss of bladder control, increased risk of stroke and cancer. So there is definitely an input about causing more cancer with these things, because you've upped the estrogen. So, it's a problem, okay, and it's a tragic problem. So I just told you some of the side effects, but those are more physical. But the mental side effects, which is what I alluded to last time, okay, where clearly people are getting chronically ill, just like with the antipsychotics.
Mm-hmm.
So in 1985, they did a 2-year study, and they found that basically relapse was a lot higher in depressed people who were getting psychopharmacotherapy. Okay, and then there's a interesting researcher. His name is Giovanni Fava, like in Favapy. I just thought it's interesting. Okay, and he reviewed all the literature, and he concluded that the long-term use of antidepressants may increase the patient's biochemical vulnerability to depression. Okay. And that's exactly what we see with the antipsychotics, right?
Right.
And he analyzed in 2003, so it's fairly recent, 27 studies, okay? He found that whether you treat depressed person for 3 months or 3 years, it doesn't matter when one stops the drugs. The trend was that the longer the drug treatment, the higher the likelihood of relapse. But still, even 3 months. So, but there's more to this antidepressant thing. As I kind of mentioned last time, it's really it's super concerning, okay, is that with the antidepressants, okay, with Prozac particularly, they had, in 1997, they had 39,000 adverse events. That's not really great. That's more than any other thing. Biggest complaint. So this is the SSRIs, and usually those adverse complaints are about 1% of the actual number. But here are the complaints, and this is what's really concerning. Mania, psychotic depression, nervousness, anxiety, agitation, hostility, hallucinations, memory loss, tremors, impotence, which is actually a pretty big thing for men and women with this. And women, impotence is like inability to have an orgasm.
Right.
Convulsions, insomnia, nausea, but I want to also say 3 times more rate of suicide ideation. Okay? So we're talking major effects, but see, it gets worse. It gets worse because in clinical trials they found that, depending on the study, somewhere between 1 and 6% of depressed people who got the SSRIs developed mania. They're pretty severe, and basically, you're running about 8.5%, so depending on the study, 1 to 6% to 8.5, but they began having psychotic episodes. So you didn't just get worse or didn't get not better. There was, depending on the study, up to 5 to 20% psychotic episodes. And
okay. Why don't you? Since you're saying that using these drugs increases both of those things, the mania and the psychotic episodes, for people that
and anxiety, yeah.
And anxiety. For people that just have a kind of a vague picture of what that actually means, why don't you describe mania and psychotic?
Mania is like you're looking at, or hypomania is like the Mad Hatter. You're just buzzing around, disconnected from reality. You just buzz.
Okay.
Mania often is also connected with symptoms of great egoic. Your ego gets much bigger, and you kind of think you're Superman or Superwoman in how you look. So it's that kind of quality. Hypomania is you're just buzzing, but mania is like you're thinking you're going to save the world. You start deluding yourself, and you think you're the Messiah. That kind of thing. Okay.
Okay.
But the problem, see, is it wasn't always reversible. That's the real serious bad news.
You're saying it is irreversible?
Well, I didn't say it's irreversible, but often it's not reversible.
Okay.
So what they're seeing is around 8.1%. I mentioned about Yale researchers found that 8.1% of all admissions to psychiatric hospitals was due to SSI-induced mania or psychosis.
All right.
Think about that for a moment. So now you got the simple depression, which is really easy to treat, again, naturally and so forth. As I write in my book, there's depression free for life. We got a 90% success rate. Okay, what we're getting here is a serious degeneration. At least 8.1% have to be admitted to a hospital with a mania, okay, or psychosis. Wow, and up to, I said 8%, but what does that add up to? Is about 860,000 people a year.
Okay.
The bad news is you start with the depression, which is pretty treatable, and you now moved into psychosis, which means more medication, antipsychotics, the whole bipolar disorder, and by the time you're done, you're on the road to permanent disability.
Okay, so just again for people to understand, what's the difference between, in observable factors between mania and psychosis? What are they? What's the difference?
Well, see, mania is a form of psychosis. Hypomania was when you're just kind of high and speedy.
Okay.
So it is called a manic psychosis. So you're out of touch with reality. You're delusional.
Mm-hmm.
You think you're here to save the world. I mean, you have all these different ideas that are not related to reality.
Okay.
So what we're saying is these people are really part of this whole group of people who become mentally disabled. That's the thing I want you to get. So that's the antidepressants. So they're very much like the antipsychotics. So I'm going to look at one more class, and that is the anti-anxieties. It's pretty much the same story. It looks good in the first 4 weeks. They did a study in 14 countries, 1,700 patients. In the first 4 weeks, 82% treated with Xanax were moderately improved versus only 42% with placebo. So that's good for 4 weeks. Okay. But 8 weeks, there was no difference in the outcome. And then at 23 weeks, actually, people who are on the anti-anxieties actually got worse.
Wow. Okay.
When they were weaned from the drugs, there was a much higher percentage of relapse among people who are on the anti-anxieties.
Okay. So if they're relapsing after they come off the drugs, does that mean is that the same as saying that it's getting to the irreversible stage?
Well, the implication is, although I don't know about the research on that, is that you get changes in the brain chemistry.
Okay.
Relapse. And then one study in 1988, people who would taper off Xanax had 4 times as many panic attacks as the non-drug patients.
Mm-hmm.
And about 25% of the Xanax patients suffered from rebound anxiety. Okay. So again, people were worse on every parameter who took the anti-anxieties. So the story is not a great one. We are manufacturing and creating an epidemic of mental illness. And that's why we've gone from 0.2 per 1,000 to, we have 100 times more mentally disabled people at this time in history. That's significant.
100 times more compared to like 60 years ago or something like that, right?
1850. So it's 150 years ago.
Oh, okay, 18. Okay.
So that's trippy.
It's the opposite of what people generally would think, I would say, because they think that with modern medicine, everything's just gotten so much better.
Yeah. And,
not necessarily true.
That's the vaccine thing, we have the cancer thing, and we have the psychopharmacological, and they don't work.
Right.
And we could talk about psychopharmacological politics, but probably most everybody listening to this understands that the money element of the pharmaceuticals is playing a huge role in influencing doctors not sick. But take that aside, most doctors really think that the psychopharmacological approach works. Most general practitioners who are handling like antidepressants like candy, they think they're helping because they're not really into healing. They're saying, well, take this, take that.
Yeah.
But they're not following it closely. It's really a huge problem. Okay. So that's kind of what's going on. And so I don't even blame the psychiatrists here, really, because it's the general practitioners, because people haven't studied this in depth. If you look at the research, it ain't good. You know,
right.
It's a very clear antipsychotics, antidepressants, anti-anxiety. And they keep saying, well, now we got a better antidepressant, and that better, but it's all comes out the same.
Well, and they're interacting every week with the representatives from the drug companies that are telling them, you know, this is the best science that we have, and this works. And basically, they're just giving the bottom line that it's all fine.
Yes, and if you don't have any scientific discrimination, you go for it.
Yeah.
You know, and so that's what we're seeing throughout. I'm just being more specific with the Drug Age of America because it's so huge. It's such a big deal.
Right.
So that's kind of really what's going on.
Yeah, it's an amazing situation.
About it, or? So
well,
I kind of finished this unit. I mean, you know, I kind of saved the hardcore research, you know, to now, so people could think about it from my last session. You know.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how everyone else listening is reacting, but to me, it's just stunning that I'm sure you're not the only one that realizes, or I'm not the only one that realizes that something radically, just almost unbelievable, is being done on a mass scale, which is doing what is obviously hurting. Because it's profitable, at least on the middle levels where it's being practiced.
Yeah, in the middle level. I mean, you're making a whole series of dysfunctional people. I have noticed in the last 5 years that a lot of people come to Tree of Life Center here in Patagonia, and they come for a detox, and you know, a good many of them are on medication.
Okay.
Harder for me. But you know, I've had to adjust so we can make it work. You know, and I'm here. We're pretty clever. We do well. You know,
okay.
What I'm saying is there's more and more people who are routinely medicated. That's That's what
it makes it much more delicate, I would think, to treat them in natural fashion, because you have to really know what might happen to them if they stop taking drugs.
You bet. You know, and that's why our detox program, our spiritual fasting program, you know, with me being present and being part of the backup, we can navigate this. Very blessed that we really haven't had a problem. So, over years.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
it's not a great situation. It's like, whoa.
Yeah. No, it's and I think what that boils down to, in a way, is that the general population, whether it's the regular people in all kinds of professions or specifically doctors and psychiatrists, are willing to do things that, at least on some level, they know are not good things to do, because they get support and they get good pay.
Yeah, and I want to be fair. Most doctors don't know that there's a problem.
I completely agree. They don't. In fact, the idea that you would even question that these things work would show that you're just not a scientist and you don't understand.
Yeah, because everything has the, it's evidence-based medicine. Well, show me the evidence. And you look at the evidence, it's like, well, that isn't the case. Same thing with vaccinations, you know. Most doctors truly believe that they're helping.
Yeah, I totally agree.
They haven't done the evidence, they haven't looked at the research, but in their hearts, this is what they believe. Well, you know, I'll qualify that, because there's a fair amount of doctors, also with chemotherapy, who say, well, I would not give my wife chemotherapy, but I recommend it for people.
Yeah, but how do they justify that to themselves, that discrepancy?
Well, the same. I'll tell you how they justify it. There's a guy who said, I won't vaccinate my kids, but I will vaccinate people in my practice. And so he's questioned me. He said, well, you know, what I do in my life privately, it's my business. Publicly, I have to do the standard of care.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's actually
lose my license.
That's true. That's true.
That's how they justify it.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
It's not like okay, there's a place, there are people, the natural doctors, the holistic doctors, they aren't cooperating, right?
Mm-hmm.
But how many doctors have been killed so far? What, 34?
Yeah, 30-something, right.
How many did you say?
I said 30-something because it's around there. So I've heard 34, 36.
That's up to 34.
Yeah.
My point is, they're not cooperating. They refuse to play in the system. Fine. That's fine. You don't get insurance that way. It's fine. Because there are people who know, I want to go to somebody who's not in the system because the system is really damaging me.
Right.
And so, but what's happening is the people who are in power are starting to squeeze on everybody, and they're making it hard. Besides assassinating all these doctors, they're making it harder and harder to operate with integrity. If they're going to make vaccines mandatory, what are we going to do about it? If a parent comes in and knows something about cancer and chemotherapy that doesn't really work, and they insist, they'll take your kids away. I mean, that does really happen.
Yeah, absolutely. It happens all over the place. So you can't blame the people who are afraid of it. Right.
That's my point.
Yeah, I agree.
So there's more and more pressure by the people in power. It's not like you're in a concentration camp like in Germany, but you're in a mental concentration camp.
Right.
And that's what people are facing. That's why people are having feelings about things. Or, that's why Bernie Sanders or, Donald Trump has meaning. People know something's wrong. And so their interest in these folks, these politicians, it's a statement. I know something's really wrong. They don't know the details. Here, you can listen to this program. You just learn the details about, the drug game of America. That's fine, okay? Short of that, people kind of intuitively know something's wrong.
Yeah.
That's what we're seeing in our society. And it's a good thing in a way because people are being more and more open because they see the results aren't there. They just simply aren't there.
Yeah.
And they're getting tired of it.
Yeah, I don't know where it's going to go.
There's so much depression.
Right.
I don't know. Have you followed the Vaxxer thing? Vaxxed?
Just a little bit. Why don't you tell everybody what's happening with that you know of?
Well, unfortunately, I don't have a lot of data. But all I know is Vaxxed is a movie documenting what Dr. William Thompson, who's a whistleblower from the CDC, they basically did the research in the MMR, measles, mumps, and rubella, and they found the data was very clear that Afro-American boys under the age of 3 had 3.36 times more autism.
Right.
And so
when they got that vaccination, in other words.
When they get the MMR, okay, and the CDC, the group of research, they made a decision that will ruin our position, saying vaccinations aren't related to autism, okay?
Yeah, not only that, they're totally safe and effective also.
Right, so they made a decision to destroy the data.
Right.
They literally destroyed the data. But William Thompson, for ethical, moral, spiritual reasons, whatever, because I saved the data. He made copies of all the data and really then called some people and, revealed what had happened. There has not been a congressional hearing. There's not been much to be said. He himself was not fired. He still works at the CDC. So they made a movie about it.
Right.
It's all vaxxed. And it was going to show at several movie showings, like in in New York and also in Atlanta, and huge pressures were created, and they had to withdraw the movie.
Yeah, it's amazing. That it would be interesting to really look at the mechanism that they used to stop it.
Well, I think there are huge pressures because the mayor of Atlanta, who's who supposedly is a liberal, like she's a lesbian, and supposedly was open to kind of social issues.
Mm-hmm.
It was from her office that they were forced to withdraw. They said, if you do the movie, withdraw all your funding to the movie.
Yeah.
Well, what pressures were put on her? I don't know. What pressures were at the Tribeca Festival in New York? Or this happened? I don't know. But there are big pressures. I'll guarantee you, because it's interfering with creative expression. It's interfering with the truth. So those are the real pressures. That's why the doctors who discovered these things, with the cancer and immunization, they got killed. Those are pretty strong pressures.
Mm-hmm. So
that's how they're responding. They're not just trying to, discredit doctors or do things. They're taking it way one step further.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned cancer. It's hard to really for me to believe that Nicholas Gonzalez is not alive anymore. I mean,
I know he was a great physician, healing cancer, healing pancreatic cancer. It's like, what's up? But he was killed. Okay.
Yeah, he was. I mean, they tried to say he had a heart attack. Your sound of your breathing is really loud in the mic there, but they tried to make it sound like he had a heart attack, but there was actually an autopsy that said his heart was fine.
Yes. So it's a very intense situation. More people are waking up. The repression, therefore, is coming more hard.
Right.
And eventually something will happen. I'm, kind of an outsider to the whole thing. I'm not that politically active. I'm a Libra, so I like to see justice. And so, I'll study these kind of things and say, oh, fine, this is drugging of America.
Right.
I get into it. And we all have our jobs. It's educating people. We have the radio show. Other people are going to be more politically active. But something is happening.
Yeah. It's like it's reaching some kind of crescendo right now. It's going in that direction.
Exactly. So, how much repression can get away with before big things happen? So, I'm going to go into the other piece to it. We have about 40 minutes. Now, I'm going to talk about longevity. And
okay, good.
Hold on a second. Because these are questions you brought up the other day.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, wait. Something went wrong here. Hold on. So, do you have any particular angle on the longevity that you're interested in?
In other words, that would be good for us to look at?
Well, what would be your interest?
The interest, you mean for me personally? You mean the reason that I would be interested in longevity, or the ways that I would want to look at it?
Well, it's more like what kind of topic? What's the angle?
Oh, within longevity? Well, the first thing that always comes to my mind with respect to longevity is that longevity is only of any use or appeal if it's not just time but quality. So just staying alive longer and not feeling good is not real appealing to anybody. So if you can increase the length of years that you've got where you feel energetic and really good and you can do things that you are interested in your life, then yeah, it becomes very appealing.
Okay. That's good. So we'll go from there. So
okay.
The first question which you raised is really longevity for what? right?
Yeah, exactly.
What's the point?
Right.
So we have different frameworks. All of us are a little different what they see. But in my world, there's only one reason for living long, which is to know God.
Okay.
An example of this was a man named Tapasri Maharaj. Have you ever heard of him?
It sounds familiar, but I'm not sure.
So Tapasri Maharaj, I think, left his body in the 1960s. He lived to be 186 years old.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And he made a choice at a certain point that he would do a process called Kaya Kappa. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
Which is a longevity process. You're underground for 3 months to a year, take special herbs, and so he went in when he was 100 and he came out looking 20 years old. Now, why is he doing it? Because he's wanting to live long enough to become liberated.
Okay.
So he did this process 3 times, and finally, in the whole process, he becomes liberated. And at which point he's no longer interested in Kaya Kappa or anything, and leaves his body.
Interesting. I'm assuming he was somewhere in India, right?
Yes, he was Indian. He lives in Bangalore.
Okay.
So, what I'm trying to say is, his concept was, if I could just live a little bit longer and do a little bit more spiritual practice, I'm going to get liberated.
Okay.
Which turned out to be the case. So that's a good reason. Other reasons, other reasons are really you have a life mission.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. It's different than a materialistic concept because I want to have more years because I want to have more years.
Mm-hmm.
It's realistic, and a little bit in the life movement, there's a tendency that way to put longevity as a goal without longevity for what. So, from my point of view, I put God, putting God. What's the longevity thing? Put God at the center of your life. Make God the context. It's like I'm going to say the number one longevity. So there was a really interesting research. It was an 80-year research program. 80 years, okay, from 1910 to 1990.
Okay.
And they studied, taking people from an early age, like 5 years old, and conducted a study. There's about 900 people in the study.
Uh-huh.
Very interesting. Okay, and one of the things is people who believe in God, they clearly live longer. So that's of kind of value to understand the story.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Picture, right? So that becomes a relevant thing in the picture. Now, what they also found was that people, what else was key here, okay? And one of those stories is called adaptability. People who were adaptable lived longer. So look at our world today, and you don't have to guess too far how important that is, right? Because if you can't adapt to things in our world, you get more and more out of balance.
Okay.
So that's one of the most important things. And what they found is the people who are the most adaptable indeed lived longer. So that has a valuable thing. So we're talking, the whole study is telling us, when they looked at who lived longer, what are the qualities that make a person live longer? So one of the qualities that make a person live longer is adaptability.
Okay. One thing I'd like to interject before we take the next step here is I'm kind of feeling the need for a segue that I think we missed between psychiatric drugs and longevity. And you know what I mean? Instead of just going random different subjects, there's definitely a connection. And I think one of the connections, and I'm sure there are many others, is that not only do the psychiatric drugs make people worse, but I'm sure they affect their longevity, right? And if you're talking about
well, I can't tell you from they did a study on it. You know what I mean?
Okay.
I can just say, yeah, the quality of life is seriously impacted in a negative way.
At least you could say the reasons for longevity once you're on those drugs decrease significantly.
Correct.
Right, because you wouldn't be having that great of a time in your life.
Correct.
Okay. And on the other side, we're going from something that's being done to cause great damage to what are the things that we can cause qualitative improvements so that longevity would actually be interesting.
And so some of that's a little bit down on the thing. Adaptability, let's talk about that.
Yeah.
You're pretty adaptable, okay? You had to live in California. You didn't get vaccinated. You know, person's adaptable is going to be very clever about getting out of the way.
Okay, yeah, okay, so they don't get run over as much.
In our society, it's a pretty important thing. And it's something you kind of learn from your parents. Remember, these are people who are in their 5 years old, if you get what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
From the very beginning. And what's going on, okay?
Mm-hmm.
So that's an interesting kind of story.
Yeah.
So that's kind of a little bit my point there. Is so adaptability is your ability to survive in what is a hostile climate.
Okay. In other words, the world as it is today.
Yeah. So I'm going to put love as one of the most important things.
Mm-hmm.
Okay?
Yeah.
A loving relationship definitely increases depth. And also, I'm going to say social networks are part of that.
Okay.
They found that people who are in relationship...
Your distance increased a little bit from the mic, I think, so you need to come
How's
back.
that? Better?
Yeah, better.
Better?
Thank you. Yeah.
Okay. So they're finding that people who are in relationships actually live longer.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and also who are in social networks live longer.
Okay.
So that's actually a bigger thing. They did a study in one Italian community in New Jersey, and they noted that people in this community lived a lot longer. But 20 years down the line, they saw that there was a drop in that longevity, and they saw that part of the modern American way, people are kind of going their own ways. Mm-hmm. And so the tight family Italian network was being disrupted.
Okay, certainly see that.
Yeah, so what was really, basically, I'm going to say, a very positive structure was being disordered by the society.
Right.
So those are the kinds of things that we're talking about, and I think it's important. But yeah, again, I want to make the point: adaptability is one of the top 5 in terms of longevity. People who are rigid and are stuck in how they want things to be, particularly in a world that's so chaotic, they just can't handle what's going on in society.
Yeah, I think this has been talked about for a long time. I mean, it reminds me of some of the things that Lao Tzu said about flexibility of different kinds of trees, that if they could bend, they didn't break.
Right. And so in the study by Dr. Tiernan, he basically documented, from following kids from 5 years on up, that was one of the top 5 longevity qualities.
Okay.
So now, after that, we're looking at another thing, which is willpower.
That's
The
interesting.
people who really have the will to live, live longer. And we can correlate that in disease. People get cancer, if they have the will to live, they're far more likely, something like 50% more likely to survive.
Okay.
So willpower becomes a much bigger deal in the story.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to highlight the willpower story.
Okay. I think. Can I make one comment on that, on the willpower thing, and that's that the will to live, when it kind of comes out naturally, and it's just your innate attachment to life and desire to live it more fully, is different in a subtle but important way from the kind of willpower where you're just willing to force yourself to try to do something, but your heart's not in it, but you have incredible effort, and force and stress. You know what I'm talking about?
Well, I think it's true. Let's say there are different kinds of willpower. In India, we talk about Ichcha Shakti, which is spiritual willpower.
Mm-hmm.
Your will to know God. Now, that would be like Tapasya Maharaj.
Okay,
right?
okay.
Okay, so that's one level, okay? That's cool. And then you have your love of life. Kind of, that's what I'm actually talking about there.
Yeah, I think so.
Although Tapasya is an example of spiritual willpower, it's your love of life, your joy of life, being an awake, living being.
Right.
Good. So the next in this top group is it's kind of a funny thing, but it's people who are very fastidious.
Okay.
You say, okay, well, why do you think that is?
Well, it sounds like those people are paying attention, for one thing.
Right. But it's a way of life. And they noted, Tyrion noted, that even at the age of 5, people were more fastidious.
Right. Okay.
Lived longer. And mostly women are more fastidious than men.
Mm-hmm.
But fastidious are people who kind of live paying more attention. They're the people who are going to be more fastidious about their health, fastidious about their diet, looking at making sure they're doing their exercise. In other words, it's a way of experiencing the world.
So they're both self-monitoring, and they take action to do what they think needs to be done.
Correct. Both levels.
Okay.
That's correct.
Okay.
Isn't that interesting?
Very.
I never would have actually thought of that, honestly. So I was like, oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So fastidious is a style of how you live in your life.
Yeah.
But
It's something that can be developed
quality.
also.
Yes. But some people are born with that more as an internal quality.
Yes.
They were able to notice that at 5 years old.
Yeah.
And obviously, someone who's fastidious is not going to volunteer to be vaccinated unless they, because they've read they're the ones who are going to actually read literature. And the research of vaccinations is very clear. It's mostly the educated parents and people who have read the literature who are not willing to do the whole vaccination thing because they've read the literature. They actually get what's going on.
Okay.
People who have not read the literature. Yeah, but that's true. But it's an attitude. So I'm going to read this literature because I'm a fastidious, and a fastidious person who reads the literature, sees what the story is, and then I'll make my own decision.
Okay.
But they're paying attention.
Right.
That's the point.
Right. Okay.
Okay. So another, which is kind of connected to fastidious, is those who value cleanliness. Now that's strange, isn't it?
Yeah,
so
that's
clean
definitely
food,
connected. Right.
Yeah, clean food, clean water, good hygiene. They also live longer, and that takes us into obviously your diet. So if you're a vegan, because they don't have the data on live food, but if you're a vegan, on the average, at least one study showed vegans live 7 years longer. Another study showed they live 4.2 years longer for men and 3.4 years longer for women.
Now, you should also point out that valuing cleanliness is not like the modern misunderstanding that sterility is desirable.
Right. That's a whole other topic, but the point is, if you're growing organic, you're doing these things, you're not worried about a little dirt on your plant. You wash it, but you're not.
Yeah.
Because you need the bacteria as part of your own biofilm system.
There's a nature-oriented version of cleanliness that is really different than the modern teaching that everything has to be killed in order to be safe.
Right. And we're facing some of that because they're going to try and pull that off and try to claim that organic raw food isn't clean.
Exactly. I mean, there's a big movement now in a huge organization called IAFP, International Association of Food Protection, interesting how they choose the name, that wants to cook and or radiate everything that's consumed.
Yeah. I don't know how big the movement is, but,
They're highly funded by the government anyway.
Right. That part I got.
Yeah.
But I think that it's going to be a hard one to enforce, but basically people are going to need to go organic, and that's part of the food cleanliness. And at the end of the stories, you're going to have to go grow your own organic food unless they, in this country, decide to make organic food illegal.
Yeah, exactly. I haven't quite gotten there yet. I think they're more interested in defining it to blend in with the kind of food they want you to eat.
I'm not sure what you mean.
I mean, if you have a certified organic program and you own it because you're the government, then you can say, well, real organic food from now on has to also be sterilized.
Oh, I see. Yes. Okay.
Instead of outlawing it, you just redefine it. And they're now in the process of trying to make all the big retailers cook all the nuts and seeds, for example.
Right. Right. And that's the first step.
Yeah.
So they're making it harder and harder for us to be able to eat in a natural, normal way.
Yeah.
And in this country, we're a minority, so it makes it really hard.
Yeah. Yeah, that's why you kind of like to live in a constitutional republic rather than a democracy, because even if you're a minority of one, you're completely protected.
Can you explain that a little bit more? I'm a little bit less politically sophisticated.
Well, yeah, I mean, as long as you don't feel like I'm intruding too much by bringing that up. But,
No, go ahead, because I need to know.
You know, all the corrupt political leaders that we've had for many years, presidents on down and above president, they've all really pushed democracy. And they've got Americans thinking that we're supposed to be in a democracy. But the founders of the country made it clear that democracy was one of the least desirable forms of government and always led to tyranny. Because, first of all, you can manipulate the vote, and as long as you believe the majority rules, you can take away any rights or even the lives of the minority in a democracy. But in a constitutional republic, where the Constitution guarantees everybody's rights come from God and are therefore inviolable, no voting can take away anybody's basic rights. So if you have the desire to eat, for example, a certain way, or you want to eat all raw food or whatever you believe in, even if you're 10 people out of 300 million, nobody can stop you, but in a democracy they can. So you want.
So that's actually new information to me. I get
it's
you. So
really important.
The word republic means life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, which comes out of the biblical understanding, right?
Yeah, it was written in the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution and other founding documents.
But it comes out of the Bible. Right?
Yeah, it's actually...
So it's God-given right. So the republic, here's the question.
Yeah,
the word republic means under God, is that what you're saying?
Well, yeah, they're saying actually that even 100,000 years before the Bible was written, you still had God-given rights, the same ones, and they're inherent in your being because of where you came from, and so that there's no action of government can ever rescind them.
Okay, but the word constitutional republic means that you're aligned with that principle.
Yeah, that in a democracy you could vote your rights away. Or of the minority of that you could anyway. So
the inalienable rights are what are validated in a republic.
Yeah, in a republic, even if you are the only person in the country who believes you want to live a certain way, and you're not hurting somebody else, then nobody can take away your right to live the way you want to.
Got it.
It's a huge difference.
Interesting.
You don't hear the presidents that are out bombing other countries saying we're doing it for the constitutional republic. They're always doing it to spread democracy.
Very interesting. So that just upped my understanding a lot. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, I wish everybody would get that. So anyway.
So, well, that's part of valuing cleanliness because you have to have a clean, functioning mind to be able to hear these.
Yeah.
So cleanliness in a way also means organic. Organic food is much better, and if it's veganic, I'm gonna, we stretch it a little bit. Well, what does veganic mean? What's the advantage? No GMOs, because veganic food means no blood meal, bone meal, or manure, and that's all comes from animals who are being exposed to GMO foods to a large extent. So you guarantee it if you're growing veganic.
Yeah, people don't realize, but actually right now, if you want to put manure on your garden, which intrinsically I don't believe there's anything wrong with it, it's part of nature, but it's getting almost impossible to find safe manure to put on the ground now because of what you just said.
Right. That's my point.
Yeah.
So that's why what we do at the Tree of Life Center here, or Tree of Life Foundation Gardens, is veganic gardening, which I believe will get more and more popular because it takes you away from the GMO situation.
I just thought of another related subject that at some point it would be nice if you talk about to whatever degree you want, and that's that in an ideal situation where everything's being recycled into the ground without causing environmental damage. Obviously, manure exists. You can't just vaporize it, or you probably shouldn't even if you could. So what is the ideal way to deal, and you don't have to answer this now, but just so we remember for future talks, how should human manure be handled?
Well, that's all about the cleanliness, isn't it? I would tend to look at composting as the best way.
Yeah, and you have patients coming to Tree of Life that are on drugs, and the drugs are going into the human waste. And can they be neutralized and recycled?
I think they can. I think the bacteria can compost the drugs. Particularly, we use the effective microorganisms, and they break down all that stuff.
Okay, I have the same feeling.
Break down radiation.
Yeah.
They break down radiation, too.
I think you're right. Okay, sorry for the interruption there.
No, I think it's interesting about cleanliness because that is the whole cycle, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it needs to be complete.
So organic is part of cleanliness, and then veganic organic. We look at the hyperactivity, and as I mentioned last session, if you just go organic, 50% of the hyperactive kids, they become non-hyperactive.
Mm-hmm.
And then you get rid of gluten gliadin, you're much higher percentage non-hyperactive, non-ADHD. and then you get rid of, a few other contaminants that are there, and you're up to almost 90%, doing really a lot better.
Yeah.
So it's very direct, and it's very good that way. I like it.
Yeah. You're talking about the alternative to the drugging of America approach.
Yes. So that's good hygiene. So, and then part of that is good water.
Right.
So most of the water is contaminated. Now, there's been a highlight on water because what happened in Michigan, which apparently is really happening all over the place. I don't have the details about the lead in water in Michigan, but clearly it was a state-level mistake, as far as I could tell. So what to do? Well, the responsible person, the fastidious person, okay, the adaptable person, see the terms I'm using, says, okay, we have an unstable, we can't count on our water being clean. Fine, I'll adapt to it. What am I going to do? Well, I'm going to get water distiller, I'll do reverse osmosis, and I'll get out 99% of it.
Yeah.
That's what I'm going to do.
Yeah.
And so these are the principles I'm saying, is that we always are adjusting. We always are adapting. There's a limit to how far we go. We're kind of we were talking about that a little bit before, How do you adapt to mandatory vaccinations? Well, that's a problem, okay? But right now, they haven't outlawed, distilled water and reverse osmosis. We can process. What I strongly recommend is you do it in your home, because the research out on bottled water has clearly shown that the companies aren't very trustworthy, and they often put tap water and sell you expensive tap water.
Well, and the vast majority of them
40 to 60%.
Most of them deliver that water in very thin, volatile plastic containers.
Right, making it worse.
Yeah.
So best do your own.
Right.
And really, when we look at the whole movement, and this is part of the struggle, the movement is local. Go local.
Yeah.
Grow your own food. Do your own water. Focus on the local community. Those are the good things. That's kind of really what we're talking about, away from the international corporations. And I know that's true outside this country. A lot of people really do understand that. And so it's return to your natural ways. They really did work better.
Yeah. Yeah.
So those are good things. Now, one of the myths that's there today is curious, and that is, your super executive working really hard is going to die younger.
Mm-hmm.
And it turns to be that's not the case. People really put their heart into it, and they're more excited about what they're doing. They actually live longer, even if they're working harder. So that was one of the things that turned into this 80-year study, is that people who really got into their work in a creative way, they lived longer because they had more purpose in their life. You have to have purpose in your life.
Right.
So that's another, I think, pretty important statement about the story. So I'm just making that point. Is contrary to our mythologies about it, hard-working people who have purpose in their life and are really trying to create and do good, they do live longer, which is nice.
Right.
Now, another thing is receive in order to share. People who are humanitarian, they feel their connection to the bigger world, they're serving and helping other people, they're giving charity, they also live longer. I'm not talking about a Bill Gates situation where you're, giving people vaccines to decrease the world population. I'm talking about really sincere, heart open, people.
Okay.
Okay? So that's actually quite important. So people, at whatever level, the research is very clear. People who are doing good deeds, so to speak, they live longer, they're happier, they're more joyful. Because all those add up.
Right. Mm.
And another quality, and these aren't the top ones, okay? These are all part of like about 20 different things.
Yeah.
Is the turtle versus the hare story. Okay.
Okay.
And being in a race is actually not so good for you.
Okay.
So we want to be like the turtle awareness, which is operating slow, steady, and letting your life unfold, going with the flow of your life.
Okay. Okay. It sounds like you're talking about some kind of internal relaxation is involved, right?
Yes. People who are able to go with the flow, more of a Taoist teaching, the flow of their life, or they live longer. It's clearly a Taoist teaching. Go with the flow.
Interesting that everything that you're mentioning on your list is also things that make your life more enjoyable.
Absolutely, because joy is fundamental. People who are depressed do not live as long. Their longevity is definitely limited. People who are happy, joyful, and in love do better, live longer.
Okay.
Now, people who self-stress do not live as long. They're trying to juggle their life in a variety of ways. Mm-hmm. So it kind of like they're kind of parallel faces. They're mirror faces. You see what I mean?
Yeah, the difference between self-stress and really devoted hard work seems to be a sense of conflict versus, some kind of harmonious flow, even though it's very energetic. Right.
You're turned on to your job, you're turned on to your life purpose, you have a life purpose, and you're living it. Doesn't matter how hard you work.
Yeah, it's actually exhilarating if you're doing it, fully.
That's right. Now, this goes with the fastidious, avoid harmful activities, avoid taking risks. Unnecessary risks. It's a small little story, but it's pretty important. And I remember actually, people think, "Oh, football's dangerous." Well, I wouldn't go skiing because I didn't want to get injured, so I wouldn't, get a ski injury and miss the football season.
Okay.
So it doesn't mean don't take risk. Take necessary risk. In my world, playing football was a necessary risk.
Yeah.
I enjoyed it so much. But you don't want to be involved in harmful activities that are not necessary.
Yeah. And it for some reason, I have no idea why, it reminds me of the biblical phrase, not to tempt God. You know what I'm talking about?
Well, yeah. It's something like that.
Okay.
But people take a lot, like even driving fast. The truth is, when you drive fast, you're taking a risk.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yep.
The truth is, if you're driving 10 miles over the speed limit, you don't really get there any faster. Because one stoplight nullifies everything.
Okay.
So, in practical reality, this is what they tell you if you get a speeding ticket, okay, is, hey, you're not getting there any faster anyway. What's the problem?
Yeah.
Drive steady, go with the speed limit, and it's safe. It's actually, believe it or not, what I observe, if you go to the speed limit, you're actually going to be safer. Okay. And you're not taking unnecessary risk. You go above, your degree of control is off. If you're going above 70 miles an hour, the car is not in your control.
Yeah, it's not touching the ground as much as you think. And
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what I'm saying in kind of a simple way is, yeah, there's a certain amount of risk you have to take if you're going to achieve your life purpose, but stay within that risk. Don't go further.
Right. Yeah.
Now, one of the things, and this is a very sophisticated concept, live productively. Now, you could be a busy bee. You could, do different things. What does live productively mean? Well, think about, when we're going to talk politics a little bit. If you live in a society where it's taking care of you from, birth to death, and you really don't have to create, emote, or put your energy into it, you just can be taken care of. In fact, in some societies, you could just hang out. Other societies, they won't let you do that. But if you look at the Norway or something like that, you can just hang out. Everything's taken care of. It doesn't necessarily help you evolve spiritually.
Right.
Now, if you're going to meditate all the time, that's great. Perfect, best. But that's a productivity. Do you see what I'm saying?
You're working on another level. You're not just lying around, yeah.
Right. So we have to be careful because society, if there's too much welfare in the sense everything's taken care of, you're really not asked to extend yourself. Therefore, you're not going to have as much spiritual growth in that process unless that's your intention. So there's some double edges with that. Of course, I'm not saying there shouldn't be, socialized medicine and stuff. One-payer medicine. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm really talking about your total life arc. Are you going to actually be interested in giving your creative gift to the world? Are you actually going to be interested in extending yourself and other things to be taken care of? So there's some serious downsides. In a sense, you become a slave to the state. There's that potential.
Yeah, I mean, you're saying something very similar to what I think it was Benjamin Franklin who said, I'm sorry if I'm wrong, but it was somebody like that who said, those who give up freedom for security will have neither.
I agree. He didn't actually say it, but somebody else said that. And those times, okay? That's kind of what we're facing today. Well, we'll be secure, so give up all your rights, okay?
Yeah.
I'm actually saying something a little different. I'm actually saying creative expression, live in a way that adds to society, live in a way that uplifts humanity, be your sacred design, be your sacred expression. That gives you longevity.
Yeah, that makes total sense.
Which is rather than just hang out.
Right, exactly. Yeah, it's almost like this killing time is not satisfying.
That's right. It's killing you.
Right.
So when I talked about the abstinent diet before, we talked about vegan, and I want to go a step further just to clarify that because I didn't really clarify it. We want to have an organic diet because pesticides, herbicides, and everything is really like the glyphosate. They're carcinogenic, okay? Plant source only, we mentioned, but low sugar. Moderate sugar, which decreases the amount of cancer, heart disease, and obviously diabetes. You want high minerals in your diet because minerals are activators of enzymes. We need it for most everything. For example, magnesium. Magnesium is needed for over 300 neurotransmitter interactions. Zinc is needed for over 300 immune system interactions. So it's a big deal.
There you go. You were fading out for a second.
Okay, so most people are also dehydrated, so you want more fluids.
Right.
We're born at about 70-75% hydration, and a lot of people die at around 60%, 55%, and basically, when you aren't adequately hydrated, your brain shrinks.
Right.
Your discs in your spine shrink because the discs are 75% water, 25% fiber. So what does that happen with age? People start to dehydrate. They get smaller because their spinal cord discs are shrinking.
Right. Yeah. If you have 33 of those and they each get a little bit smaller, you're going to be quite a bit shorter.
Right. So that's what happens. People lose an inch or two. At 73, I am actually the same height. I may be a little bit taller, but I'm at least the same height.
Yeah. So you've done some things really different.
Dehydration. So, yeah. But that's important.
And also, if you're eating raw live food all the time, then a lot of that is water to begin with, and you're already better hydrated, right?
The live food has more water and more oxygen.
Right.
About 25% more oxygen. So it's a big deal.
Yeah.
And I suggest about 80% live food as a minimum. I suggest people eat according to the Constitution. That's a longer discussion where people have unique constitutions. We've known that in Ayurveda. Okay, Kapha, Pitta, and Vata, and then variations of those. There's like 9 variations. Okay, don't eat too much, and make sure what you eat is made with love.
Yeah.
Because love goes into the.
Yeah.
So these are all really, really good things. Exercise. I didn't put that at the top of the list. Exercise is important. But in turn, saying it was not in the top 10. It was not in the top 10. I consider it important. I don't totally agree, but again, he's looking at it differently. So those who exercise, clearly live longer, but it wasn't like the major effects like love and purpose and adaptability.
Yeah. Well, I've noticed something really interesting about exercise, and that's that if people are making big mistakes in nutrition or avoiding detoxification and they exercise hard, it can actually be dangerous.
Yes, because they don't have enough, not only energy, but nutrient to hold the power of the exercise.
Yeah, you see these long-distance runners having heart attacks and stuff. I think it's connected to toxin and nutrient levels. I mean, just seems that way.
I think it's right. But we know exercise is good.
Right.
Moderate exercise. Walking fast, jumping on a rebounder for 10, 15 minutes. These kind of things are actually really good. And I think that's the important concept there.
And not sitting for 8 hours at a time, even if you're exercising every day.
Yes, because the data kind of suggests if you sit for more than an hour at one time, it's not so good for you.
Yeah, okay.
So that's good. But exercise is fun. It actually is probably one of the best treatments for depression. For mild depression, you get an 80% result.
I've often wondered when you're talking about depression and exercise, we know that the whole lymph system, which is like another blood circulation system without a heart that needs the muscle contraction to move, and it's getting rid of a lot of the toxins in the body. And we know that there's a cerebrospinal fluid that circulates and washes out the toxins from the brain. It makes you think that the brain really needs the exercise too, and the same fluid circulation that the muscles cause.
Oh, for sure. But the cerebrospinal fluid kind of flushes the brain. So all the spinal exercise is flushing the brain that way.
Okay.
That's why the whole yoga with the spinal forward bends, backward bends, and so forth.
Okay, right.
Okay, so now another thing from a Chinese point of view are the 3 treasures.
Okay.
What are the 3 treasures? Jing, which is the deep primordial essence that you're born with, the prenatal Jing, postnatal Jing. Qi, daily life force, and Qin, which is like your spiritual life force. Okay? So you can kind of think like a candle, but like Jing is the candle. Okay? So if your Qi is okay, you don't burn into your Jing. which is your deep primordial life force.
Okay.
Shen is like the spiritual heart energy, which is needed for spiritual evolvement. So those are the three treasures. You want to live in a way that nourishes all three of those.
Okay.
So you don't want to use up your deep life force by using up all your life force, daily life force energy or chi.
Okay.
So these are things, and the Chinese, besides everything else, there are certain herbs that really build all these things, okay, which I think are very, very important in the stories. What are some of these tonic herbs? They're called tonic herbs. Gynastemnia, reishi, which is great for the shin, but also great for the brain, function, great for memory, goji berries, ginseng is a huge thing for the brain function, and heart, and the adrenals. These are all things that are there's a whole list of herbs. This is, of course, in herbalism, but the point is the Chinese tonic herbs can be, are actually quite good. Overplaying, excess in all kind of things to weaken the jing, burn up the jing.
Okay.
In India, we'll call it ojas. So we have to be kind of careful. Too much time on the computer is going to burn ultimately your jing. So we have to conserve these, in a very thoughtful, meaningful way. One of the things that people don't pay enough attention to is called sleep.
Say that again. It's called what?
Sleep.
Sleep. Okay.
So we find out that if you need at least 7 hours sleep to really do adequate repair. Some people feel 8 hours is off, but basically sleep's the big player.
Okay.
And if you're getting just 6 hours sleep, you're actually hurting yourself. The body repairs between 10 p.m. and 2 a.m. Those are your big sleep repair times. Your neuroendocrine system repairs, your endocrine system repairs, and your serotonological system repairs during those times. So you need the sleep. And that's a hard one. That's my hardest challenge is I get going at night. I want to just stay up and keep studying and looking and keep,
Yeah.
It takes a little discipline to get to bed. It's a hard one. But sleep is definitely a longevity issue. People who do the midnight shift, the graveyard shift, that's why they call it the graveyard shift. They do not live as long.
Yeah.
Actually don't live as long. I just want to check how we are on time.
Yeah, we're fine. I mean, any time that you want to wrap it up at this point, we're in that range.
Okay, so I'm going to go over a few more. Loving yourself, respecting yourself are fundamental. It's all part of the love issue. That makes a difference. People who really feel good about themselves. For men, the importance to develop the feminine side. Women don't have that much of a problem the other way, but those are kind of the softer qualities of life, the more intuitive qualities, because women live longer than men. So developing, and it also includes taking care of yourself. Women take better care of themselves.
Right. Yeah, that's true.
That's the fastidious. So men need to be more, longevity way. They need to take the good habits of living. And begin to incorporate those into their lives.
Right.
Another one is be the sovereign, unique self you're meant to be. Be your true expression. That's a big deal. And in our society, it's be part of the crowd. Okay. And with tremendous pressure with the political correctness and this and that, don't disagree, don't be different, don't be unique. But all of us are meant to be unique expressions as part of the whole. Now that's the point.
Right.
As part of the whole.
Right.
So, but what's happening is that there's a lot of pressure in our school system and all. Be like everybody else. Don't make waves. That's very important for longevity because you aren't really expressing yourself. Wow, where are you? I was giving a talk over radio in Toronto, internet in Toronto, and then one of the questions came up is, what if you don't feel there's much purpose in life? What to do? Well, the point is, there is purpose. Find it. That means be your unique expression. So those are actually quite big issues.
Right.
Meditating is important. People who meditate definitely live longer. People who've been meditating for over 7 years, this is really interesting, have 15 years younger physiology.
Wow, that's really interesting.
That's really interesting. Yeah. So, we want to, keep a healthy environment, minimize TV, be out in nature. These are all things that actually are important. Mm-hmm. Again, they're not at the very center of the game, but spending time in nature reharmonizes you with the divine in all things. Pretty important. Part of a larger community is actually very sustaining, is very, very important. Healthy relationships, as I mentioned, is one of the key things for longevity. People in relationships live longer. The data is interesting. People in an active relationship live the longest. People who have never been in a relationship do not live as long. People who've been divorced but are in some kind of relationship, live pretty long, not as much as if you've really been in long-term relationships, stay in it. So there are all kinds of good things about relationship. Mm-hmm. I mentioned sexuality. It wasn't at the top of their list, but it was there. So sexually balanced relationship is pretty important. Being with like-minded people, finding your collective of people, because again, we're not meant to be islands, is really important, and is important at kind of every level. And I'll kind of end with this one: don't worry, be happy.
That's great.
It's pretty important. Is to be happy, and men. Well, how do I put it? Women pay more attention. They could worry a little less, but men could worry a little bit more. So it holds that men need to worry more because they have to pay more attention. Women could worry a little less. So there's a little balance there at the sexual thing. If you aren't paying attention, you aren't being fastidious, then you're compromising your longevity. Mm-hmm. If you worry too much, you're compromising your longevity as well. So these are all the things that all contribute to the whole energetics of healthy, meaningful, vibrant, creative longevity.
Yeah. I think another way to translate that is that when you're looking at the balance between the breakdown and the repair of the cells and tissues in the body, the things that make the repair catch up with the breakdown are all the factors that you were talking about. Right.
That's a good way to put it. So that gives us an overview, and when you're living this way, you know enough, particularly fastidiously, to stay away from levels of toxicity, even if the doctor says it's good for you, like psychopharmacological drugs, like vaccinations, like chemotherapy. I mean, these are all things that really aren't good, and there are clear alternatives that are far more successful.
Right, yeah. It's very, very positive, uplifting note to end on, I think, that the drugging of America may be what's happening right now, but there's all kinds of ways to improve on that and turn it around.
Exactly. And that's what we're really doing. So how do we live at our highest octave?
Yeah, exactly.
And when you're doing that, when you're doing the highest level of self-expression and meaningful spiritual evolvement, you naturally live longer as well.
Right.
So they go hand in hand.
Yeah, and not only would it be longer, it'd be a lot more enjoyable.
That's right.
So, okay.
Okay, well, good.
So
I just want to send my blessings to everyone out there who's listening. And may these teachings be uplifting to you in your life.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
Okay, well, hold on and we'll say goodbye in the break here. And
okay, I think we're good.
Yeah, me too. Have a great night, and we'll be in communication. Okay, so there goes Dr. Gabriel Cousens after his latest lesson discussion with us, and incredible opportunity that we've all been enjoying to hear from him frequently. It's been once a month, and it may continue for the rest of this year if his schedule allows, but rare opportunity. I hope that you're really getting a lot out of it. There are several things that he said, and I'm sure you noticed I was having my usual reaction of wow after a lot of the statistical exposés that Dr. Cousens was giving us. And I thought, in the beginning when he was talking about the evolution of use of psychotropic drugs in psychiatry, Thorazine was, I guess, the first one that was used, and I think he said 1955. And that when they brought it, it's become kind of famous from the well-known movie One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest with Jack Nicholson and other people in it. Really good movie, but pretty strange and potentially depressing, creating more patients for Thorazine. But when they started using the Thorazine, they increased the mentally ill patient count by 5 because of the Thorazine, apparently. At least that's how I understood Dr. Cousens' explanation. And then with that higher number, when Prozac came in again, and this was compared to a baseline taken in 1851, I think it was. And then they doubled it again, even over that number, when Prozac came out in 1987. So now you're up to 10 times. And then between 1987 and now, according to what Dr. Cousens was explaining, they multiplied it again by 10, even over that figure. So we're looking at 100 times more mental illness thanks to the use of these drugs since 1851 or so. So 165 years, something like that. And the use of cutting-edge science in drug technology has managed to increase mental illness by a factor of 100. And I think Dr. Cousens was pretty clear. It's not because they figured out how to diagnose it better. It's because they're just completely messing people up by getting them addicted to multiple drugs. And it's now a $20 billion retail profit industry as of 2004. So it's probably higher now, 12 years later. But it's totally clear that after some short-term covering up of the symptoms that does happen, it makes patients worse in every case. And it's still exploding in it as an industry. So that should make us really ask the question, what is wrong with that picture? We've been trained to feel that the doctors, who are mostly really great people, many of them are friends of mine, they're giving the people this medicine. And so what's going on? Why would they give them medicine that makes them worse? And I mean, it's probably not because they don't notice anything going on, but it tends to be because they're totally convinced in their education and training that this is the best opportunity that exists. It's the best thing that you can do. And the few that start questioning that and realizing it might not be the best thing, they are given the stick side of it as a warning that if they depart from the medical standard of care, they can lose their income, lose their license, and potentially go to prison. Usually I don't think they're told publicly that they can be killed, but clearly that's true because holistic doctors now are getting murdered. Doug just brought up the fact that in the last few days there have been 3 more, and it's not likely to be coincidental. This is definitely, a trend that's happening, just like government had to recently, during Obama's administration, had to purge a lot of generals and top-level military officers who wouldn't go along with criminal activity in the military. They just had to be gotten rid of. I don't think they were killed mostly, but they were definitely fired for things that were just made up from nothing, or minor infractions that are probably going on all the time and were just used to get rid of them. And in the same way, the medical doctors, holistic doctors of different kinds, are being purged, but mostly by killing them. And it makes me wonder why they're not just getting rid of them like they do honest military officers, by accusing them of some nonsense. And I think the reason is because the crime is much more serious with the medical doctors. They're actually exposing a gigantic fraud. They're not just saying, I won't go along with it. They're saying, I'm going to expose it. And I'm also going to expose the alternative. And that's completely unacceptable, because that could ruin the whole business. The military officers that say, well, I won't carry out unconstitutional orders, I'm going to join Oath Keepers, or I'm not going to disarm American citizens if another Katrina happens. You know, if they're just gotten out of the military, then they're replaced by somebody who will follow illegal orders and the problem is solved. But in the case of some kind of medical practitioner, or especially a medical doctor, Dr. Gonzalez, for example, who was curing cancer frequently, just getting people on natural diets primarily. And, you know, that was completely unacceptable. It was hard to get rid of him for a long time, but they finally managed to do it. And it was called a heart attack, and then they had an autopsy, and the autopsy said his heart was fine. There's just so many advanced assassination weapons now in the hands of government agents that it's really easy to get rid of almost anybody. And he had worldwide exposure. It wasn't like refusing to follow unconstitutional orders. So how this psychiatric drug problem, and the drug problem in general, where they're getting everybody addicted for life to as many medical drugs as possible, psychiatric and otherwise, I haven't heard a lot of, suggested remedies for the situation. Dr. Labo talks about it, and Dr. Blaylock talks about it. Dr. Cousens is talking about it. And I think the best that they've come up with that I know of is exposing things like Dr. Cousens just did with us for the last couple of hours, that America is being intentionally drugged with chemicals that are known to make everything worse until they finally kill you, and that there are alternatives. So Dr. Cousens has a lot of great free videos on YouTube, and not just about curing autism. I'm sorry, not autism, but diabetes, but lots of other conditions. He's just specializing in diabetes. He considers that his main job and role to play in this particular case. But the same kind of natural procedures can cure all kinds of diseases that are supposedly incurable. I would say a great example of that that's happening every day is Marcus Rothkranz. And he has a lot of great websites, but one to look at in particular is Heal Anything. Heal, Heal anything.com. And he's got all kinds of great videos linked through that particular website. They're getting testimonials in constantly about people applying his basic protocol of detoxification followed by live food nutrition, along with exercise and sunlight exposure and grounding, positive thoughts and emotions, all this stuff working together. And he's found, and he's demonstrated, it basically cures just about anything. So, and that goes right together with what Dr. Cousens was going over. He was talking about the essentials of longevity. And we'll go through a couple of those because I had some comments on some of them that I didn't really get to while we were talking. Adaptability is absolutely essential. That Lao Tzu that I mentioned in our discussion, and other philosophers have said, if you're absolutely rigid, then they give this example of a tree that in a big windstorm, the one that survives it is like the willow or the palm tree that can bend. It's got fibers instead of rigid material inside of its trunk. And if you can bend and be more relaxed and kind of go with things, if you're looking at it in a martial arts metaphor, it would be like Aikido, that just when there's an attack coming right at you with Aikido, you don't just stand your ground and try to force your way back against it. You go right with it, let its force just go right by you and through you, and the damage never happens, and the opponent goes flying off in the direction that they were racing toward you in. So it's like that in life in general. If you don't allow yourself to get overly upset or just fall apart with things happening, but relax internally and go with them. Adaptability leads to longevity. Also with good relationships, that was found to be very helpful. And that's a whole other part in itself, the relationships, because the relationships improve with the adaptability and with the flexibility and with trying to, instead of be critical of the people that we're dealing with all the time, the ones that are around us constantly, where they say familiarity breeds contempt. And I think that's really demonstrated in almost everybody's life if they're not very careful about it happening. And to just silently give the people that were around the gift of wishing the best for them all the time, sincerely. And relationships change when you do that. It's just really amazing to watch. Also, it was really neat that Dr. Cousens dispelled the myth that I remember used to be popular in decades ago, that if you work really hard and you're very devoted to whatever you're doing, very focused, you don't cut your sleep out, but you work long hours with really determined to make a positive difference in the world, that does not cause stress, high blood pressure, and a shortened lifespan. The focus is actually a healthful, positive thing, and it's possible to relax internally. This I'm just putting in from my own experience and what I've learned from people who have demonstrated this. You can work very hard, very great results in what you're putting out, and be internally relaxed. And I think that's what Dr. Cousens was alluding to, that in that case you can be working very hard, but on the inside, relaxed and not stressing yourself to do the work. And it actually makes the work more productive, makes it more effective, and not beating yourself up to get something done, but staying focused and relaxed. Let's see, what else did I want to say? Certainly his bringing up dietary things like low sugar, which I found is one of the most difficult challenges in everything with diet, because we tend to love a sweet taste, and I don't think that's totally an accident of nature, because fresh fruit has some really good qualities. Sometimes you can't do fruit, you can't do anything with any sugar like that when you're dealing with actually curing a disease like diabetes or many of the other ones. In fact, what Rudolph Bruce had said in the Bruce Cancer Cure, which is a really interesting book that I highly recommend that people get from Amazon if you get a chance. It's probably on several websites as well. Bruce is Breuss, and he was finding that if you kept people away from not just all sweets, but he put them on a vegetable juice fast for 6 weeks, which seems like a pretty long time, and he had his own reported cure rates were above 90% of serious cancer cases. And it struck me, and I've commented on this before, that the Gerson therapy, which does some of the same technique and uses carrot and other juices for juice fasting, still also uses some cooked food in the form of steamed vegetables and things like that. And from what I've seen, in the really severe situations, it's really necessary to cut out all cooked food and probably all food for a while. And this goes with what Marcus Rothkranz says too. He's just giving a general idea for a protocol for all these serious conditions that works with most things. He's pointing out he's not giving medical advice, because you're not allowed to do that these days in America and most other places. But he's saying what he's observed that people have the best results with in any kind of serious health situation is starting out fasting, even if it's only a day or two, on water. Not water in plastic, which you should never drink, but good spring water in glass, or highly filtered water that you can get easily for 25 cents a gallon in most good natural food stores, and just put a pinch of Himalayan salt or something in there to offset the acidity that distilled water has. Put some minerals back in. And Marcus, is talking about starting with a water fast like that in a relaxed, nice environment that is not stressed, getting enough fresh air and sunlight, and positive emotional state, and then going from there to juice fasting. And juice fasting can be done for a long time because there's a lot of nutrients that come in through the juices. And there are great videos, again, that you can easily find on YouTube. Look up juice fasting or juice feasting, which some people call it, because you get so much nutrition. And you put juice fasting or juice feasting and then whatever disease you're thinking of. And people are starting to post their experiences, not just with cancer, but with all kinds of other very serious conditions. And it's amazing how many of them are totally cured with juice fasting. And I'm not telling you to do this because I can't do that, but I think it's pretty interesting to look into this if you need to, and I would highly recommend it even if you're not sick. Periodic juice fasting has a lot of really great benefits, and a lot of people now fast too on water 1 day a week. It's like another aspect of kind of a Sabbath where you're not pushing your body to work by digesting a whole bunch of food all day, and it has a chance for healing work internally then that it doesn't usually do. So back to the sugar issue that Dr. Cousens mentioned. When he's dealing with diabetic patients, they just can't have any fruit or any sweet stuff at all. They may use stevia, I'm not sure, because stevia has what's called a zero glycemic index, and it still tastes very sweet. It's a natural plant. And watch his video on 30 Days of Curing Diabetes to check on that, or read his book, There is a Cure for Diabetes, which I'm sure the conventional medical establishment hates that book, because that's exactly what they don't want you to believe. They want you to believe it can be managed, because see, management is profitable, and you never get off drugs, and you never get off having to have constant medical appointments. But cures, medical cures, are completely, no profit whatsoever, because if you're cured, you don't need anything else. And it's just the crazy system that we're on that makes money the sicker you are. So you just want to be aware of that. Also, Dr. Cousens, I've only got a couple minutes left here. I want to go over a few other things. He mentioned overeating and longevity, that those two things are completely mutually exclusive. And I agree with that completely, with what I've seen, that and what Marcus points out frequently, that the longest lived people just barely eat. And they're not doing that because they're just gritting their teeth and, thinking about all this great food and forcing themselves not to eat it. That does not work. Any of these health things that you try to do by that kind of willpower, and I know Dr. Cousens talked about willpower, but not the kind that I'm referring to now. The kind of willpower where you're just straining to make yourself do something that's good for you and you really don't want to, that does not work, because eventually there's a backlash and you end up overdoing it, to make up for the so-called discipline. The only way that I've seen that actually does successfully do that is to take a completely different attitude toward yourself. First of all, you have to be completely relaxed inside, which is a lifelong habit that you need to get into. I don't want to say discipline or stress or something that you have to fight to do. It's not any of that. It's looking inside yourself, starting to be aware of where your tension is, and internally giving it the direction to release. And something that makes that easier, by the way, is not having any bad thoughts or feelings toward any person at all, no matter what they're doing. You can be aware of what they're doing and know that you have to protect yourself from it or do something to help it stop happening or whatever you have to do, but not harboring condemning feelings toward them, because it's not just because you're wanting to look like this really great person who doesn't criticize others. It's because we're so intimately connected on a deep spiritual level to everybody else that whatever we feel towards other people comes back to us. Whatever we wish for them, not on a superficial mental level, but deeper down, we are going to get to experience it. So even if you only care about yourself, it works fine, because when you become really selfish in an enlightened kind of way, you are just anxious to help everybody around you as much as you possibly can, because what you give to them comes back to you multiplied, and it always works. Maybe not instantly, so people miss it, but it always happens. So with the longevity idea, loving other people in the sense of wanting the best for them, helping them anytime you can, it's not just a romantic idea. It's nothing like that at all. It's whatever you can do to help them, because you want them to have a good life and you want them to be happy, or just thinking good thoughts toward them. That is transformative for yourself. And if you're not sure about it, try it. I mean, watch what happens. It's pretty amazing. Dr. Cousens mentioned sleep, and I totally agree. I agree with him that that's a hard one, because when things calm down at night and it's peaceful, it's easy to think of all these things you want to do, but the body regenerates during sleep. It's like when you work out at the gym, you don't get stronger while you're doing those exercises. You wake up your body and your muscle tissue and everything gets going, but you don't get stronger exercising. You get stronger after you stop exercising and rest and sleep at night. So you don't want to cut that out. He's right that 10 to 2 is the most important hours for that, and then whatever additional you can get. If you can't do it, take a nap or something, but that's the best that you can do when you get a chance. And I think he mentioned, in many ways that it really comes down to self-love and respect. And I was an example of a person who was told that for year after year after year by people that knew, one in particular. And I thought, love yourself, that's ridiculous. How could you do that? I mean, there's so many things that I don't wish that were different about myself. And I don't understand that. I thought loving yourself was like being enamored of yourself on a personality level. And it's not like that at all. It's treating yourself like a small child in your own care. And if you master this, and you do it with eating and everything else, and you're just kind to yourself, what happens is you become able to be kind to others, and it opens it up, whereas willpower never succeeds at that. So whatever attitude you take toward yourself, that's the attitude you get to take towards others. And I really appreciate, Dr. Cousens showing us so many ways that this is true. And he mentioned that men have to develop more of the good qualities of women, and I totally agree with that too. Men have wonderful qualities just as much as women, but some of the ones that women have, as far as more commonly developed compassion and just being kind, would be really beneficial for men. They combine that with their own masculine side of strength, and it can do some incredible things. So anyway, time's up. So really nice to be with you again this week, and remind you about the question and answer show that we just opened up experimentally next week. If you want to talk about any of these things as applied to your own life, this is a great chance to do it. Next Saturday morning, 8 o'clock Pacific, 11 Eastern, and then the Sunday show, 6 o'clock p.m. Pacific, 9 Eastern, and we'll see you then. Have a great week.
Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/Lost Arts Radio. Visit our website at lostartsradio.com for Richard's weekly focus articles, as well as lots of other really great free educational resources. We also have links to all of the great independent musicians whose music we feature each week on Lost Arts Radio. And if you like Lost Arts Radio, please consider donating a few bucks or leave us a tip to help keep us on the air. We spend many, many hours each week to bring you the best show we can with the best guests around. You can find our donate button on our website at lostartsradio.com.